since early spring, a 3-day loop near Reed's Peak with trails less traveled. Me and my buddy Levi were looking for something quiet, away from the usual crowds. Levi had this new ultralight tent he wouldn't stop talking about, and I just needed to escape Salt Lake for a bit. Late September was perfect. We left on a Thursday morning with warm daytime temperatures, but cold enough nights to keep most hikers away. The first day went smoothly. We parked near Mirror Lake, hiked about 7 miles, and set up camp beside a small alpine pond nestled in a granite bowl. Complete solitude surrounded us. The air was dry and sharp, pine scent saturating everything around us. That first night was unremarkable, just typical wilderness sounds. Wind rustling trees, water gently lapping the shore, occasional small animal movements. We broke camp early the next morning, around 7, heading toward a saddle that would take us across the western side of our loop. The trail was challenging, more of a game path in many sections. Rocky, narrow, sometimes disappearing under fallen branches or old snow patches. We weren't rushing. Our goal was to reach the base of East Notch Peak and camp just below the tree line. Around noon, we stopped at a clearing with a stunning ridge view. We sat on a small granite outcrop to eat, Levi munching jerky and pointing out weirdly shaped clouds. That's when I first noticed something odd, a faint, constant static sound, like an old TV signal, but distant. Not loud enough to overpower the wind, just a persistent background noise. I asked Levi if he heard it. He paused mid-bite, tilted his head. Yeah, he confirmed. The sound didn't change when we moved, didn't seem to come from any specific direction. I checked my phone for potential signals, but we had no service. The strange static continued, unexplained and eerily consistent. We were hiking through a narrow valley with steep slopes, the trail eventually opening into a wide cirque with a flat meadow and scattered boulders. East Notch loomed over the far side, jagged and pale against the sky. The wind started picking up, that cold, dry kind that whistles through granite cracks. I had my phone in airplane mode to save battery. Levi and I stood there, noticing a strange sound. At first, just static, then little clicks mixed in, sharp and irregular, almost like a Geiger counter but slower. You think it's a plane? Levi asked. I looked up. Clear blue sky, no contrails, no movement. It's not going anywhere, I said. The sound wasn't constant. It would fade in and out, sometimes lasting 10 seconds, sometimes a minute. Never loud, just enough to unsettle us. We were about a quarter-mile from our planned campsite when the static became clearer. Levi stopped. That's not just in my head, right? Nope, it's louder now, I confirmed. He pulled out his phone. No signal. We hadn't seen any signs of civilization all day. No towers, no ranger stations, no fences, just rock and sky. The clicks became more frequent, almost forming a pattern, but never quite succeeding. The static would fade and return sharper, like tuning an old radio. I noticed the hairs on Levi's arms standing up. Mine were too. We camped near a cluster of stunted trees on the leeward side of the ridge. The sun dipped early, and temperature dropped fast. A quick dinner, then we retreated to the tent before the cold set in. Neither of us wanted to discuss the sound. That night was unnaturally quiet. No wind, no animals. Even the branches were still, the kind of silence that feels like a trick. I listened to Levi's steady breathing, assuming he was asleep. Then the static returned, faint at first, seeming to bleed through the tent fabric. The night started off like any other camping trip with Levi, but something felt different. The static in the air seemed to materialize round my head, not quite outside, not quite anywhere specific. Then came the clicking, sharp and precise, like a fingernail tapping against plastic, just beyond the tent's edge. I froze, barely breathing, certain the sound would wake Levi. But he remained still, his breathing steady and calm. Another click burst through the silence, longer this time, followed by an eerie quiet. Then the static returned, buzzing intensely like an overstretched wire. Slowly, I sat up, careful not to make the tent floor creak. My hand hovered near the zipper, though I couldn't explain why I didn't open it. Instead, I listened intently. Then came the whistling. 3 distinct notes, high, low, high, floating up the slope. My heart raced so hard I felt nauseous. The silence that followed was thick and oppressive. I don't know how long I waited, eyes wide open, listening. Eventually, I lay back down, not sleeping, but waiting for dawn. When morning came, we packed up in complete silence. Halfway down the trail, Levi finally broke the quiet. "Did you hear the whistling last night?" he asked. I nodded. No further questions were asked. The rest of the hike was unremarkable, just typical forest sounds. Birds chirped, wind rustled, chipmunks scurried under rocks. Back at the truck, with 1 bar of cell signal, Levi searched for nearby radio towers. The closest was 20 miles away on Vol.19. We haven't returned since. This wasn't our first strange experience. A few weeks earlier, I'd been driving back from my sister's place in Modesto, heading south toward Fresno. It was a warm Tuesday in mid-September, around 9:30 p.m. I was eager to get home, avoid crashing on her couch, and be ready for work the next morning. The drive started normally enough. The AC was low, windows slightly cracked to circulate air. Highway 99 was nearly empty, the sky clear, with a moon visible through a hazy, smoggy atmosphere. I was driving through Turlock and Merced, making a quick stop at a gas station off East Childs for water and to stretch. Around 10:42, I texted my roommate Curtis, who responded with a typical thumbs-up emoji. I merged back onto the highway, cruising at about 70 miles per hour. Then, something strange happened. There's a gap in my memory. I'm certain I didn't fall asleep at the wheel. I'd experienced nodding off while driving in college before, and this felt completely different. That previous time, I'd immediately caught myself, heart racing and swerving slightly. This was nothing like that. No moment of losing control, no dream, no sudden return to consciousness. Suddenly, I was parked on the shoulder of a 2-lane back road. The engine and headlights were off, as if I'd been there for a while. The silence was overwhelming. No motor hum, no air vents. Pitch black surrounded me, with only a dim orange glow on the distant horizon. I wondered if I'd pulled over for something and forgotten, maybe due to a migraine. But I've never had migraines. I checked my phone, still in my lap. The screen showed 10:45 p.m. I stared, confused. I clearly remembered texting Curtis at 10:42 while getting on the highway. Only 3 minutes had passed? Impossible. I'd driven at least 20 miles since then, maybe more. The odometer told a different story. I was 40 miles south of where I should have been, not on Highway 99 at all. Google Maps showed I was on Avenue 12 near Madera Ranchos. Dark fields and almond orchards surrounded me. No streetlights, no houses, just rows of trees and a faint outline of the Sierra foothills in the distance. As I tried to make sense of what happened, I noticed details that seemed off. No music was playing. The car was completely shut off, as if I'd deliberately turned the key. My seatbelt was unbuckled, something I never do unless parked for a while. The cabin air felt warm and still. I started the car again. The engine turned, over normally, with no dashboard warnings and a full tank. Then I spotted dirt on the tires. I'd checked them carefully in Merced earlier, a habit I developed after a blowout years ago. They had been clean then. I was driving through southern Illinois near the Shawnee National Forest in early November. The weather was cold but not freezing, with that kind of chill that seeps into your bones if you stay still. I'd set up camp in a small clearing off an unmarked trail, away from the crowded public spots where people stomp around with noisy gear. When I noticed something was off, I got out and walked around the car with my phone flashlight. The tires were packed with dry, crusty soil, like I'd driven down a gravel road. No damage was visible, no scratches or dents. But there was dust on the rear windshield and a smear along the side, as if a branch had brushed against it. I looked around. No branches nearby, just flat fields and low trees. I called Curtis, but he didn't answer. I left a voicemail saying I'd be later than expected. Back in the car, I tried to convince myself I'd maybe taken an exit without realizing, but I couldn't remember any turn. No lights, no signs, nothing between my last text and this moment. I followed the road east until I hit Route 41, then got onto 99 and made it home just after midnight. The entire drive back, I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting someone to be following me. Nothing ever appeared. That night, sleep was impossible. I lay on the couch with the TV barely audible and lights off. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the empty road stretching endlessly, hearing only wind moving through dry branches. Questions kept spinning. Why did I stop the car? Why would I shut it down? What could have happened in those missing miles? The next morning, I checked the car again. still dusty, tires still caked. No dash camera footage. I hadn't installed one yet, something I'd been meaning to do. My phone's GPS history showed a straight line from Merced to Fresno, skipping the entire detour, as if I'd simply blinked and arrived 40 miles ahead. A week later, I drove the same route during daylight, searching for that mysterious road. I spent 2 hours exploring, but never found the same spot. The closest I got was an intersection near an irrigation ditch, but it didn't feel right. Too many houses nearby. Whatever road I was on, I haven't been able to locate it again, and those 40 miles remain unexplained. Greta was an 8-year-old black mutt with shepherd and possibly lab mixed in. Her energy belied her age, and she had an uncanny ability to sense danger. While I typically traveled solo, her keen nose for deer and intuitive nature meant she increasingly accompanied me on these trips. We arrived around noon, setting up camp just southeast of a shallow ridge where the woods began to thin. A few old tracks were visible, but nothing recent. The area was delightfully empty, exactly how I prefer it. After cooking dinner over a small fire and feeding Greta, we settled in for the night by 9. The second night was different. I'd been perched about 15 feet up, nestled between 2 oak trees since before dusk. Greta remained on the ground below, loosely tethered with enough room to move. She's not one to bark without good reason, and that night she was unusually quiet, occasionally shifting and sniffing the air. Around 6:30 or 7, the wind began to change. It wasn't strong, just enough to make the higher branches rustle and the air feel cooler. I was scanning a stretch of lowland brush, hoping to spot movement before darkness fell. But something was off. The woods were unnaturally silent. No deer, no birds, not even the usual cricket sounds. Then Greta made a sound, a low, drawn-out whine that was more breath than noise. Completely motionless, she stared intently westward, her ears pricked and body tense, much like when she spots a coyote. Following her gaze, I initially saw nothing. Then, just above the tree line, about 100 yards out, 3 faint bluish-white lights appeared. They weren't bright or blinking, just hovering and drifting slowly. My first thought was a drone, maybe some local trying to capture night footage or startle campers. But these lights were different. Too large, too widely spaced, moving with an unnatural smoothness. What truly unnerved me was how they moved against the wind. The breeze was blowing west to east, yet these lights drifted westward, completely unaffected, without a hint of wobble or sound. I was out hunting in an area I know well with Greta, my dog. The day started normal enough, but something strange happened that I can't quite explain. I spotted these lights moving through the trees, perfectly stable, almost like they were following an invisible track. When I raised my binoculars to get a better look, they vanished instantly. Not just out of view, but completely gone. Greta was acting weird, growling in this low, pulsing way she only does when she's truly scared. I stayed in my hunting stand for another 20 minutes, scanning the trees, but the lights never reappeared. When we finally headed back to camp, she stuck close to me, tail down and ears flat. That night, around 2 a.m., I woke up to a strange vibration. It wasn't loud, more like a low hum I could feel in my chest and jaw. Greta was awake too, staring intently at the tent wall. I listened carefully, but heard nothing. No engines, no footsteps, just this weird pulsing sensation that seemed to come from underground. After about a minute, everything went completely silent. No wind, no forest sounds. Back home, I checked my binoculars in the backyard, making sure they weren't damaged. They worked perfectly fine. I've hunted that area many times since, and nothing like those lights has happened again. I've asked around casually, but most people just suggest I saw a drone or plane. But I know what those look like, and this was different. What haunts me is how the lights seemed to disappear the moment I tried to get a closer look. It was almost like they were aware of my attention, existing only when not directly observed. This happened last July, during a family trip back from my cousin Lydia's wedding in Missoula. We were all packed into our old Subaru, my parents, my little brother Evan, and me, with suitcases crowding our feet. The most unsettling part is how deliberate it all felt. Like something was watching, playing a game of near visibility. Those lights moved with an intelligence that didn't feel natural or explainable. We were driving west on Highway 12, heading toward Tri-Cities before turning back to Vancouver. The afternoon heat hung thick and syrupy, especially near those slow-moving rivers. I sat in the back passenger seat, watching the sky. Huge summer clouds towered overhead, shaped like massive anvils you could almost climb. Evan was passed out with his face pressed into a neck pillow. My parents were quiet, zoning out. We hadn't seen another car for miles. The clouds drifted lazily, massive and slow. That's when I spotted it. A glint way up high, just above the tallest cloud's edge. It caught the sunlight and flashed, not like lightning or a plane moving across the sky. This was different. One quick reflection that didn't disappear. Instead, it stayed perfectly still, like a piece of metal suspended in midair. I leaned forward. "Hey, what is that?" My mom barely responded, just a slight nod without turning. "No, seriously," I insisted. My dad glanced up, squinting. "Where?" I pointed. "Up there, above that flat-topped cloud on the left. Something's hanging." He shook his head. "I don't see anything, bud." The object was strange. Not moving like a plane, not floating like a balloon. It just hovered, rock steady, silver, almost sharp-looking. Every few seconds, it would catch the light with a quick flick. I looked down to grab my phone, and when I looked back, it was gone. Not drifted away, not hidden in the cloud, simply vanished. An hour later at a gas station, I asked my dad again, "Did you really not see anything?" He gave a half smile. "I looked where you pointed, but saw nothing." Evan, now awake and playing his Switch, didn't even look up when I asked. "See what?" he said. The mysterious glint remained unexplained. 2 weeks after my first sighting, we gathered at my uncle's house in Battleground for a backyard cookout. The family event had about 10 of us spread out in folding chairs, with paper plates and a low-volume classic rock playlist drifting from someone's Bluetooth speaker. Overcast skies allowed occasional sunlight to break through the clouds. Standing near the yard's edge with a soda, I was talking to my cousin Jordan when I spotted it again. Same silvery glint, same weird hovering spot. I nudged Jordan. "Look up there," I said, pointing. He squinted and tried to follow my finger. "Where?" he asked. "Right above that big cloud," I replied. "You don't see that shiny dot?" Jordan wasn't convinced. "I think you're seeing the sun behind it," he said. But I knew it was in front of the cloud. I called out to my dad, who was flipping burgers nearby. He glanced up with a tired shrug. "What am I looking for?" he asked. When I described the shiny spot, he just suggested I needed sunglasses. The object remained stationary for about a minute before blinking once and vanishing. No one else saw it. A few nights later, I was walking our dog Cassie on the trail behind our neighborhood. She's a skittish brown mutt we've had since I was 10, and she typically avoids busy areas. Around 10:30 at night, the sky was mostly clear with a few high clouds and visible stars. About half a mile into the woods, Cassie suddenly froze. Her legs locked, ears perked, tail stiff. I crouched beside her and listened, expecting to hear a raccoon or another person. But there was only wind rustling through the trees. Then she let out a low, shaky whine. Looking up, I saw it again. This time, it was against the starry background, small, shiny, and sharper than before. It wasn't like airplane lights or a drone's movement, just sitting high and still. I stared, my neck aching from the prolonged gaze. Cassie remained motionless, continuing her soft whimper. Without warning, the object dropped, not falling or tumbling, but descending in a straight, impossibly smooth line, incredibly fast. High up near the clouds or stars, I'll sometimes catch a point that shouldn't be there. Nobody else seems to notice. I started taking pictures with my phone, but nothing ever shows up, just sky. After what happened with Cassie, I stopped mentioning it to people. That night, Baxter woke me around 3:45. Out here near Scottsbluff, Nebraska, it's quiet. A few farms down the road, closest neighbors about a mile east. The dog doesn't usually bark at night, and even when coyotes are around, he just gives a low warning growl. This time, he was on the porch, pawing at the screen and whining hard, desperate to get inside. When I opened the door, he bolted in without even looking at me, tail between his legs. Something was off. I threw on my boots, grabbed a flashlight, and stepped outside. The August night was cold and unnaturally still. No insects, no frogs by the creek, no owls in the trees near the fence line, just complete silence. I scanned the pasture with my flashlight and saw the cows. They were clustered in a tight circle at the southern end of the field, about 50 yards from the barn. Every single one faced north toward the tree line, standing shoulder to shoulder, completely motionless. In 15 years of raising cattle, I'd seen them crowd during storms, or when a bull gets aggressive, but this was different. They weren't huddling, they were lined up. I climbed over the fence and walked slowly toward them. Something felt increasingly strange. Normally they'd glance at me, even half asleep, but now they kept their heads fixed toward the trees, ignoring me completely. In the flashlight beam, I could see them trembling, legs shaking, sides twitching, yet making no sound. I was out checking on the cows late one night when something strange happened. They were clustered together, completely still, just standing there. When I approached within about 10 feet, they didn't react at all. I scanned the tree line, but saw nothing, just darkness. Then I heard it, a low, deep hum. It wasn't mechanical like a vehicle, but a steady tone I could feel in my ribs more than hear with my ears. The sound seemed to come from behind the trees, and the cows remained motionless. My flashlight started flickering, something that had never happened before. I began backing away, not scared exactly, but alert, like I was interrupting something I shouldn't be seeing. Baxter watched me through the screen door and didn't come out. When I crossed back into the yard, the cows still hadn't moved. Inside, I grabbed my old binoculars from the coat closet. I'm not sure why, just a feeling I needed to see better. I turned off the porch light and stood behind the truck, hidden from view. Looking through the binoculars, I caught a pale blue-white light high up in the sky. It wasn't a beam, just a steady, diffused glow. Almost like a patch of sky was illuminated, except there were no clouds. The stars were clear, and the light seemed to exist without a source. I watched for 2 full minutes. It didn't blink or move. Then suddenly, it vanished, not fading, but switching off like a light. The humming stopped simultaneously. The cows began to stir, shifting weight and turning heads, gradually drifting apart as if waking from a trance. Soon they were grazing normally. The next morning, I walked the field. Everything looked untouched. No damage, no tracks, no burns. The grass was normal, the soil undisturbed. But the cows were different. They were skittish all day, repeatedly turning toward the tree line like they were expecting something. That night, Baxter refused to go outside after dark. I had to carry him to the porch, and he immediately tried clawing his way back inside. I didn't see the light again. Not that night, not since. The cabin sits in northern Minnesota, tucked near Basswood Lake, where gravel roads rarely have names. Claire and I come here every summer for a long weekend. Just us and our dog Finn. He's a shepherd mix, excellent on trails but skittish around strangers. This particular trip was early September, warm during daylight but cooling quickly after sunset. We'd spent the evening grilling burgers and sitting on the deck, drinking beers while watching the sky turn purple behind the tree line. The silence was profound, the kind city dwellers forget exists. No traffic sounds, no neighbors, only occasional loon calls drifting across the water. The stars that night were stunning, crystal clear, with the Milky Way stretching directly overhead. Claire identified a few constellations while we watched for satellites. Finn remained unusually close, his ears back, which was strange. Normally, he'd roam the property's edges, investigating trees and chasing moths. Around 10:30, I was mid-conversation about a roofing quote when Claire interrupted. "Look up there," she said, pointing left of the tallest pine. Initially, I thought it was an airplane, a small highlight moving slowly. But this wasn't blinking. It was a solid, pale yellow dot, bright as a star. Its movement was peculiar, not horizontal like an aircraft, but descending vertically, too rapid for a plane, yet too controlled to be falling. No sound accompanied it, no trailing glow, just a steady, precise downward motion, as if sliding on an invisible wire. We stood and moved off the deck into the yard, watching. The light dropped perhaps a third toward the horizon, then did something extraordinary. It stopped, not slowed, stopped completely, suspended motionless for 2 or 3 seconds, hanging in midair. The cows in the nearby field seemed different that night. They huddled closer to the barn than usual, packed tightly together. I never mentioned this to the neighbors. Sometimes, around 3 or 4 in the morning, I'd wake inexplicably, lying still and listening. We'd seen something strange earlier that night. a light moving in reverse, backtracking at the same speed and direction like a video being rewound. We stood frozen, staring until it rose back to its starting point and vanished without a dramatic disappearance, just fading like a distant flashlight through clear, dry air. Every star remained visible around the spot where it had been. Finn wedged himself between my legs, and after a moment, Claire broke the silence, asking if what we'd seen could have been a flare. I simply shook my head. We continued watching the sky for another half hour. Nothing else stirred. That night, I left the loft's curtains open, giving a view over the lake. Claire fell asleep quickly, but I remained alert, listening. Every creak of the cabin seemed amplified. Sounds like branches breaking beyond the tree line kept catching my attention. Possibly deer, possibly nothing. Early the next morning, I took Finn out. Dew covered the ground, and the sky was cloudless. At the canoe dock, he refused to step onto the wooden planks, instead sitting on the shore and staring across the water. I scanned the tree line where we'd witnessed the light, finding no evidence. No smoke, no fallen trees, no landing marks. We tried to rationalize it. Maybe a drone, maybe a perspective trick. Yet throughout the rest of the weekend, we couldn't help repeatedly glancing skyward. Saturday night was quiet. We watched a movie and went to bed early. But around 3 a.m., Claire woke me. A faint, constant humming had caught her attention, similar to distant power lines. I got up, went downstairs, and opened the front door. The humming ceased. Barefoot, I walked toward the yard's edge. Absolute silence surrounded me. No wind, no crickets, no aircraft. Then the humming returned, seemingly closer, hovering above me. Looking up, the sky remained crystal clear, stars razor sharp. But one hand-sized patch was different. A pure black void where stars should have been, as if something invisible blocked the celestial backdrop. It remained stationary for about 10 seconds. I didn't move, barely breathed. Then it began drifting westward, smooth and silent, stars reappearing in its wake. I waited another 10 minutes, but nothing more happened. I chase storms every spring and summer out in Oklahoma. Not professionally, but it's a passion of mine. My gear is simple: a beat-up Subaru Outback, a good camera with a long lens, and Tucker, my brown and white border collie mix who rides shotgun. He's smart, but doesn't like lightning much. Late May, the sky was thick with humidity and heat pressing down hard. The radar showed a big supercell brewing near Kingfisher County, about an hour northwest of my position on a gravel road by some farmland. Clouds rolled in fast, big, greenish-gray, swirling like a giant blender. I'd been tracking this storm for an hour. Tucker was asleep in the back, but tense in that way animals get before bad weather. The wind picked up, but the storm hadn't dropped anything yet. Just a phone alert about possible hail and tornado watches. I pulled off the road as the first thunder rumbled. The sky looked insane, like charcoal and smoke had been spilled across it. The supercell had a classic R, rotating wall cloud, but this time it felt different, thicker, heavier. I grabbed my camera and got out for a better angle. Wind was near 50 miles per hour, rattling the car and whipping grass around. Tucker followed hesitantly, staying close. Then I saw something. What happened next still haunts me. We were sitting on the stairs later, pale as hell. Claire hadn't seen it directly, but heard the humming stop when it moved. We didn't sleep much that night. Next morning, we packed up early and cut the trip short. Something just felt wrong. Back home, I checked flight paths. Nothing was flying over that area on either night. No meteor showers, no launches, nothing. Claire doesn't like discussing it now. She says she didn't really see it move, just the light dropping. Maybe her brain filled in the details. But I saw what I saw. Whatever it was, didn't behave like anything I've encountered in the sky. It wasn't the shape or light that disturbed me most. It was the movement, the precision. Like gravity didn't apply. Like it was following rules we don't understand. The storm was wild, clouds twisting and howling with wind gusts pushing everything around. About 1,000 feet above the wall cloud, a dark shape hovered completely still. At first, I thought it might be a drone, but it wasn't moving at all. No blinking lights, no visible propellers, just a big flat disc, maybe 40 feet across, matte black with a faint sheen from the low light. Tucker growled low and tugged on his leash, looking up at the thing like he wanted to run but didn't know where. I raised my camera and started filming, hands shaking slightly. The shape was so sharp against the gray sky, it made the swirling clouds look blurry. Despite the tornado force winds, this object didn't shift an inch. No wobble, no spin, no sound, as if it were completely detached from the storm's chaos. I watched for about 5 minutes, filming as best I could until the storm started moving east and the rain hit hard. Jumping back into the car, I locked the doors and let Tucker settle on my lap. Through the rain-smeared windshield, I kept my eye on the dark shape. The entire time, not a single noise came from the object. No hum, no buzz, just absolute silence, even as thunder cracked around it. It felt like the object was part of the storm, yet simultaneously outside of it. Slowly, it faded from sight as the rain thickened. I continued chasing the storm for another hour, but it never reappeared. Later, I called Claire to share my experience, but she was busy with the kids and didn't seem to understand. She suggested it might be a weird cloud formation or a trick of the light. The next day, I reviewed the footage. The object's outline was crystal clear, but something seemed off. Its edges were too crisp, not blending with the atmosphere like clouds normally would. Slowing down the video and zooming in revealed more oddities. It didn't reflect lightning or rain. Not a single drop seemed to fall on or distort the image. I tried showing the footage to other storm chasers online, but most dismissed it. Some suggested it was a drone, others a camera glitch or an insect near the lens. No one had seen anything similar. Since that night, Tucker and I still chase storms every season. I watch the sky carefully now, hoping for another sign. But nothing has ever moved quite like that silent shape again. That moment under the supercell, watching the shape hold steady in the chaos, left me with a strange feeling. It wasn't just watching the storm, something else was happening. The night shift at the small wastewater treatment plant on Millersville's outskirts is usually quiet. Miles of woods surround the isolated facility, with no neighbors for at least a mile. Just the machine's hum and occasional owl break the silence. This particular night in late May, around 3 a.m., felt different. My black lab mix, Hayes, Elle had been my companion for 3 years and was unusually tense. Her ears twitched with every wind shift, and she seemed on edge from the moment we started our patrol. The sky was clear, but heavy humidity hung in the air. Moonlight illuminated the pine trees bordering the property, casting long shadows across the gravel paths winding between tanks and ponds. Every sound seemed amplified that night: leaves rustling, water dripping, distant trucks rolling down the highway. Halfway through my rounds, Hazel suddenly stopped and let out a low growl. Following her gaze, I spotted something about 200 feet away near the tree line. A low, round object glowed with a pale blue light, hovering just above the ground. Unlike any lantern or flashlight, its glow resembled a bioluminescent jellyfish, smooth, pulsing, and gentle. Suspended maybe 4 or 5 feet off the ground, it was barely visible between the tree trunks. No sound accompanied its presence, no hum, no buzz, just complete silence. Hazel tugged at her leash, eager to investigate, but I held her back. Frozen, I watched the object. Then, as if suddenly aware of my presence, it vanished. Not a gradual fade, but an instantaneous disappearance. The woods returned to normal. No glow, no movement. My heart racing, I called Hazel and moved toward the tree line, that unsettling feeling creeping up my neck. Something was watching me, and that's where the feeling sticks, right before the thunder breaks loose. I still don't know what it was, but I know what I saw. I was driving home from a weekend trip to visit my sister in northern Colorado. Late October had painted the sky a deep twilight by the time I hit the highway heading back south. My old Subaru Outback was packed with bags, and Jasper slept curled up in the back seat. The highway stretched through a quiet valley, flanked by low foothills. Farms and open fields dotted the landscape, but mostly it was just empty road and gathering darkness. I'd been driving for hours, the radio playing softly in the background, occasionally murmuring to Jasper. Something happened that night. I can't fully explain it, but it was real. Not a dream or a trick of light. Afterward, I found myself watching the tree line every time I was outside at night. Faint glimmers would catch my eye, but when I looked closer, nothing was there. I landed somewhere, or something did. A mark on the grass, perhaps. But when I investigated, the ground was untouched. No crushed leaves, no broken branches, just forest and silence. Hazel, my dog, stayed close, her tail down, eyes darting into the shadows. Something wasn't right. I checked the security cameras. The footage showed nothing unusual, just normal light flickering, branches moving in the wind. I asked coworkers about it, but they just laughed, suggesting I was overtired. Yet Hazel's reaction was unmistakable. Whatever it was didn't communicate or move. It simply appeared and disappeared. I kept my distance from that part of the woods afterward, but sometimes, when I'm alone out there, I feel something watching just beyond the trees. Hazel won't go near that spot. It didn't change shape or do anything remarkable, but it felt profound. This is the closest I've come to something I can't explain. And honestly, I'm not sure I want to get any closer. The radio station was nothing special, a small local one playing country music and oldies. It was the only station that came through clearly in this part of the state. As I drove, something caught my attention. Every time I reached mile marker 118, the radio would do something weird. Instead of music or static, a rhythmic clicking would emerge. This wasn't typical interference. No hiss or crackle, just a slow, steady tap like someone methodically clicking a pen on a desk. Initially, I dismissed it as a signal glitch or loose connection. The clicking would last around 30 seconds before the radio returned to normal. Each time I passed that marker, the pattern repeated with uncanny precision. I started paying closer attention, trying to understand if this was random or intentional. Switching stations yielded nothing. The clicking remained locked to that specific frequency. When I changed channels, the signal would drop to static, but return to the original channel, and the clicking would immediately reappear. At a rest area down the road, I stretched my legs and let Jasper explore. The air was crisp and bone-chillingly cold. Looking back at the highway, I saw a straight road cutting through the valley. No turns, no hills, no radio towers, just empty fields and dark hills that offered no explanation for the strange signal. Back in the car, the phenomenon continued. Every single time I hit mile marker 118, the clicking returned. Perfectly consistent. I attempted to record it on my phone, but road noise obscured the sound. The repetition began to unsettle me. It wasn't loud, but its mechanical precision felt deliberate. On my fifth pass, I decided to investigate. I pulled over before the marker and turned off the radio completely. Silence filled the car, interrupted only by Jasper's breathing and distant wind. Then, exactly at mile marker 118, I heard it again. Soft at first, but unmistakably present. The road was dark and empty, stretching out before me with nothing but fields on either side. A strange clicking sound caught my attention, different from the radio's static. I rolled down the window, and the cold air carried a hint of damp earth. Instantly, the noise stopped. Something felt off. The clicking seemed to exist only when the window was closed, like some bizarre acoustic trick. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe the car was picking up some weird radio interference, but the unease lingered. When I reached the next town with clear radio signals, the sound disappeared completely. I checked my GPS, confirming that the strange noise was confined to that isolated highway stretch. Later that night, I examined the recordings on my laptop. The clicking wasn't random. It had a distinct pattern reminiscent of Morse code, but unlike any language I knew. Sometimes it sounded mechanical, other times like metal tapping. I shared the recording with friends, a radio technician and a local hiker. Neither could offer an explanation. The tech noted that interference typically comes from nearby sources like radio towers or power lines, but this area was virtually empty. The hiker mentioned local legends about abandoned mines and strange occurrences. On my next drive through that highway section, something new caught my eye. A soft, pulsing light flickered just beyond the road's edge, hidden behind a ridge. It wasn't like headlights or a campfire, more of a gentle, ethereal glow. But as I approached, it vanished. Driving home, an inexplicable feeling of being watched crept over me. Jasper, my dog in the back seat, seemed equally unsettled. The mysterious clicking and that strange light continued to haunt my thoughts, defying any rational explanation. The night was cold and quiet, early November, with a slight wind moving through the pine branches. I was out in the remote woods behind my place, flying my drone around 1000 p.m. The area was nothing fancy, just pines and rocky outcrops. I usually fly at night because the darkness helps me focus, and the drone's LEDs stand out beautifully against the black sky. My German Shepherd, Rory, sat calmly on the truck's tailgate, his ears twitching occasionally as he watched the woods. I'd been cruising above the treetops for maybe 15 or 20 minutes, practicing smooth, slow shots of the forest canopy. The controller felt steady in my hands, and the screen showed the live camera feed. Around the 5-minute mark, something strange happened. The drone suddenly wobbled, losing control for a second or two. I remember it dipping sharply, and I quickly slammed the joystick to correct its path. It stabilized fast, but the moment definitely unnerved me. I checked the controller for warnings or errors, finding nothing unusual. The battery was fine, and the GPS signal strong. I brought the drone down slowly, landing it on a flat rock near the edge of a small clearing. Rory perked up but didn't bark. Before packing up for the night, I decided to review the footage, half expecting some typical drone camera glitch. But what I saw was different. Just above the treetops, the camera had captured something. Not a bird or animal, but a shape. Oval-shaped and slightly wider than tall, it remained completely still in the frame. Its edges were soft, slightly blurred, with a faint, dull glow like pale light behind a thin veil. What struck me most was the audio, right where this shape appeared. All ambient sounds, the wind, the rustle of trees, simply vanished. I haven't been back to that road since. Sometimes the memory plays in my head, a slow, steady clicking, like a message I can't quite understand, right there at that mile marker. I'd been flying my drone over the forest when something caught my eye, a strange, motionless shape that didn't make any sense. I replayed the footage repeatedly, zooming in and adjusting settings, but the object remained completely still. The drone circled around it, yet nothing changed. No lights, no movement, no discernible features. Curiosity got the better of me. I grabbed my gear and headed out to investigate, hoping to find a rational explanation. Maybe a tarp or a weather balloon tangled in the trees. But when I arrived, the forest felt different, unnaturally quiet. No animal sounds, no wind. Even my dog Rory stood unusually still, head lowered, watching the shadows between the trees. I searched the area thoroughly. No tarps, no wires, no poles, just old pine needles and branches. I circled the spot, sweeping my flashlight around, but everything looked completely normal. No footprints, no crushed vegetation, no signs of recent disturbance. Back in my truck, I tried to dismiss it as an optical illusion or drone malfunction. The next day, I showed the footage to my tech-savvy friend Alex. Frame by frame, we analyzed the clip. He confirmed something was off. The light wasn't from the drone or tree reflections, and the total silence was bizarre. Most cameras pick up some background noise. A few nights later, I went out again with my neighbor Sarah, who has a similar drone. As we approached the spot, both drones experienced the same strange signal lag. 1 second of lost control, then back to normal. When we reviewed the footage, Sarah's drone had captured a similar vague, soft-edged shape in the exact location. Something else caught our attention on Sarah's video. Just before the shape appeared, there was an odd ripple in the air, like cold heat waves, a kind of shimmering distortion. We couldn't explain it. Multiple attempts to recreate the experience failed. We tried flying at different times, day and night, but the drones never captured anything unusual again. The feeling of being watched, however, lingered. We were camping in the Mojave Desert, about 50 miles northwest of Joshua Tree. Our little group consisted of me, my wife Eliza, our 7-year-old daughter Naomi, and our skinny terrier mix, Juno. We'd deliberately chosen a spot on BLM land away from the campgrounds, seeking true solitude. The desert night sky stretched wide and open, studded with endless stars. You could see the Milky Way clearly, untouched by city lights. It was late April, warm during the day, but the nights still carried a sharp chill. After dinner, we settled in for the evening. Eliza and Naomi were in the tent, reading by flashlight. Juno roamed the campsite's edge, chasing desert lizards and nocturnal critters. I was tending a small fire about 20 feet from the tent when something caught my attention. At first, it was barely perceptible. A faint whisper carried on the dry wind. I initially thought it might be typical desert sounds, wind rustling through scrub or distant coyotes. But then the sound grew clearer, and I realized it wasn't any animal or human noise I'd ever heard before. Multiple voices were whispering simultaneously, their words overlapping in a way that made comprehension impossible. It wasn't English, Spanish, or any recognizable language, just soft, urgent murmurs that seemed strange and unsettling. I called Eliza over, and she paused to listen. Now, years later, strange remnants of that night still linger. Rory, our dog, grows uneasy whenever we pass near that forest edge. He stares into the trees as if seeing something invisible to me. I've stopped flying my drone in that area and rarely drive by. Some mysteries, it seems, prefer to remain undiscovered. I've reviewed the drone footage countless times. In the moments after an unexplained wobble, my phone screen would flicker, struggling with the video file before the player crashed. Attempts to open the file on my computer revealed only corruption in that specific section. A shape, frozen and silent in the air, vanishes whenever I try to examine it more closely. My equipment consistently glitches at these moments. Juno was the first to sense something was off. Her ears perked up, and she started growling low without barking. We all froze, listening. The voices seemed to hover just above our tent, not on the ground or in the distance, but suspended in the air around us. The desert lay completely still, with these whispers wrapping and circling us. I swept my flashlight across the sky, scanning for any source. Stars twinkled overhead, but nothing else was visible. No helicopters, planes, or drones, just the dark expanse of the desert night. Eliza tried to calm me, suggesting it might be wind through brush or an animal call. But these sounds were different, more deliberate, like a conversation happening just beyond our understanding. As we moved closer to the tent, the whispers would fade and then surge back when I stepped away. It felt like the sound was connected to our tent somehow, but not in any physical way I could point to. Naomi seemed strangely unbothered. As she was drifting off to sleep, she mumbled something about people in the sky talking to her. Her tone was more curious than scared, which made the moment even more unsettling. That night was restless. Every time I closed my eyes, those whispers seemed to hover just at the edge of my hearing. The next morning, we packed up quickly. I thoroughly checked the campsite, scanning for footprints, disturbed ground, or broken branches. Everything looked untouched, as if nothing had happened. Juno remained skittish, nervously sniffing around the area. During our drive home, Eliza tried to lighten the mood by joking that we might have imagined the entire experience. Maybe it was just an odd canyon wind echo. But I couldn't shake the memory of those voices, invisible yet present, speaking a language just beyond comprehension. We've camped in many places since then, and nothing similar has occurred. But occasionally, when the night is quiet and the wind is just right, I catch myself listening for those same faint, mysterious whispers that haunted us in the desert. Southern Oregon's early spring night was unusually clear as I set up my telescope in the backyard. The weekend stretched ahead with no work, and city lights had dimmed enough for a good view. My black Labrador Luna settled quietly on the grass nearby, her habit of sitting perfectly still making her an ideal companion for my stargazing. I'd been scanning familiar constellations, Orion moving westward and Cassiopeia rising near the horizon. This old telescope belonged to my late dad, complete with a taped-up, cracked lens cover. I'm just an amateur who enjoys learning by watching the night sky. Around 12:15 a.m., while adjusting the scope to view the Big Dipper, something unusual caught my attention. At first, it was subtle, a cluster of stars that seemed to be rearranging themselves. I blinked and focused harder, watching as the stars in that small patch slowly, deliberately shifted positions. The movement wasn't sudden, but deliberate. Stars began forming a shape that didn't match any constellation chart I knew. It looked like an angular zigzag or a rough diamond with surrounding dots. The pattern was faint but unmistakable, hovering steadily for 5 full minutes. Luna lifted her head, ears perked, and eyes fixed on the same spot. Though dogs probably can't see stars like humans do, she seemed unusually alert. The air felt heavier and colder, despite minimal wind. My heart raced as I remained silent, watching through the telescope. The stars held their strange formation, no blinking, no fading, completely motionless. At first, I thought it might be a trick of my eyes or a satellite, but this was different. Something about the precise, deliberate arrangement suggested something more than a typical celestial movement. Then, Just as quietly as it began, the pattern dissolved. The Mojave Desert stretched out around us, a vast expanse of quiet wilderness about 50 miles northwest of Joshua Tree. Our campsite on BLM land offered complete solitude. Just me, my wife Eliza, our 7-year-old daughter Naomi, and our skinny terrier mix Juno. Late April brought warm days but chilly nights, with a sky so clear you could see the Milky Way without a hint of city light. That night, after dinner and settling in, I went to start a small fire for warmth while Eliza and Naomi stayed in the tent. But something felt different. Earlier, I'd experienced something strange with the stars, a moment when they seemed to shift and scatter before returning to their original positions. I remembered rubbing my eyes and checking my telescope, finding nothing out of place. No clouds, no planes. The neighborhood had been still, street lights dimmed by the late hour. My dog Luna had nudged my hand, sensing my unease. I wasn't sure whether to speak about it or simply sit with the experience. When I told my sister the next morning, she laughed it off. Online searches through astronomy forums and star maps yielded no explanations or reports. A few nights later, I'd gone back outside with the telescope. The sky was cloudier, Luna staying inside. While adjusting the scope, I'd noticed a faint, pulsing humming sound, a low-frequency vibration that rose and fell. No nearby machinery or traffic could explain it. The sound lasted about 10 minutes before disappearing completely. Something felt like it was watching from the treetops, though I never saw anything. The stars remained steady and silent. Now, sitting by the desert campfire, those memories drifted back. I still look up whenever I can, thinking about that unexplained pattern and the quiet pulse of that night. It's like a message, one I can't quite understand. I was out in the desert, tending the fire about 20 feet from our tent. Juno, our dog, was prowling around the edges, chasing whatever small creatures scurry about at night. Eliza was nearby, and I was reading by flashlight when something caught my attention. At first, it was just a faint sound, barely noticeable against the desert's usual backdrop. I initially thought it might be the wind or distant coyotes, but then the sound grew clearer, and I realized it wasn't like any noise I'd ever heard before. Multiple voices seemed to be whispering simultaneously, overlapping in a language I couldn't recognize. It wasn't English, Spani, Shish, or anything familiar, just soft, urgent murmurs that seemed to hang in the air. Eliza came over when I called her, and Naomi peeked out of the tent. Juno's ears went up, and she started a low growl without barking. We all stood motionless, trying to understand what we were hearing. The voices appeared to be coming from directly above the tent, suspended in the air rather than from the ground or distance. The desert was completely still, except for these whispers that seemed to wrap around us, circling like an invisible presence. Though not loud, the sound filled the silence in a way that made me want to look straight up. I swept my flashlight across the sky, but saw nothing, just stars and the dark desert night. No helicopters, planes, or drones were visible. Eliza tried to explain it away as something natural, but the sound was unlike anything I'd experienced in the desert before. It felt deliberate, like a conversation we weren't meant to understand. As we moved closer to the tent, the whispers would fade and then return more intensely when I stepped away. It was as if the sound was somehow connected to the tent, yet not something physical I could identify. Later that night, Naomi said something curious about people in the sky talking to her. She didn't seem scared, just intrigued, which struck me as odd. I barely slept, constantly thinking I heard those whispers just beyond my perception. We packed up and left early the next morning, the mysterious sounds still lingering in my mind. I was out flying alone one late afternoon, just a regular flight from my small private airstrip near Bend, Oregon, out over the Cascade foothills. The sky was clear, with that soft golden light you get in early fall, making everything look a little warmer than it really is. After decades as a commercial pilot, I still liked the simplicity of these solo flights. No schedules, no passengers, just me and the old Cessna 182, cruising at about 7,000 feet. Normally, I don't bother much with radar when flying out here. It's mostly clear airspace, and I trust my eyes and instruments. But this time, I decided to keep the little portable ADS-B receiver hooked up just for fun. It's a tiny device that shows other aircraft nearby on a tablet screen, mostly so small private pilots like me don't accidentally get too close to anyone else. About 40 minutes into the flight, I was following a straight heading southwest, skimming over pine forests and river valleys. The little screen showed a few blips, mostly distant private planes or gliders. Then one blip caught my eye. It was moving strangely, not like the other planes with predictable paths. This one seemed to mimic me exactly. At first, I thought it was just a coincidence, maybe some plane flying roughly parallel. But it kept pace with me, matching my every turn and climb with exact precision. When I banked right, the blip banked right too. Same rate and angle. When I climbed, it climbed. Later, we walked around the tent site to check for anything unusual. Footprints, disturbed dirt, broken branches, but everything looked untouched. No sign that anyone had been there. Juno was still skittish, sniffing around nervously. On the drive home, Eliza joked that maybe we just imagined the whole thing. Or maybe it was some weird echo from the wind in the canyon nearby. But I don't know. I kept thinking about those voices, how they sounded like they were right above us, but invisible, like some kind of presence that didn't want to be seen. We've camped a lot since then in all kinds of places, and nothing like that has happened again. But every now and then, when I'm outside at night and the wind is just right, I swear I hear faint whispers. Not in any language I know, but the same quiet murmurs from that desert night. I was flying. Everything seemed normal until something caught my attention. The radar showed a blip moving exactly in sync with my aircraft. No matter what maneuver I tried, a gentle turn, a steep climb, a quick descent, this mysterious dot followed me precisely. It was unsettling. For nearly 40 years of flying, I'd never experienced anything like this. I scanned the sky outside my window. Nothing. No other aircraft, no contrails, no lights. Just endless blue and forested hills below. I checked the ADS-B device repeatedly. The blip wasn't blinking, showed no call sign, just a perfect dot moving in perfect harmony with my plane. I radioed Bend Approach to confirm. They reported no other traffic in the area. That made it even more unnerving. A radar blip mimicking my every move, yet invisible to everyone else. My calm demeanor started to crack. My heart rate climbed as I watched this silent shadow. After about 10 minutes, the blip disappeared as smoothly as it had appeared. One moment present, the next completely gone. I stared at the screen, then continued my flight home, constantly searching the sky. When I landed, I took a screenshot and showed my pilot friends. Some joked about drones or technical glitches, but no one could explain its precise, synchronized movement. The memory haunted me. No sound, no visual, just a silent, invisible companion that tracked my every move through the sky before vanishing without a trace. I couldn't shake the feeling that something unexplainable had happened that day. The drive home from my late-night diner shift usually takes me through open, quiet fields. Most nights, only the occasional truck or fellow commuter breaks the silence. But this particular night was different. Early spring brought a clear, cool evening with just a hint of chill. As I drove about 10 miles out of town, something unusual caught my attention ahead. At first glance, it looked like a plane suspended motionless over the highway, not flying low, but literally hanging in place about 50 or 60 feet off the ground. No sound, no blinking lights, just a dark, strange shape against the night sky. I slowed down, blinking and trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Was it a crane? A drone? A helicopter? Nothing seemed to fit. The object's complete stillness was unnerving. As I approached, it began rotating slowly, as if turning on an invisible axis. The shape was triangular, unlike any aircraft I'd ever seen. Smooth edges, no visible wings or rotors. My headlights seemed to be absorbed by its surface rather than reflecting off it. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, feeling uneasy. Passing underneath, I watched in my rearview mirror. The object remained fixed in place, rotating silently. No cables, no poles, no engines supporting it, just hanging there. Weeks later, I discovered I wasn't alone. An online local forum revealed other drivers had reported identical experiences. Between 10:30 and midnight, multiple people described the same phenomenon, a silent, dark triangular shape hovering in the exact same highway location. Some even mentioned their phones losing signal or GPS acting strangely in that area. The next time I drove that road, I intentionally left later, hoping to see it again or understand what it was. I arrived around 11:15 p.m., watching and waiting. The highway was dark and quiet, just pine trees and my headlights cutting through the night. Suddenly, the same dark shape appeared, hovering and rotating slowly over the same spot. As I slowed down, my radio began to crackle with static, the signal breaking up for a few seconds before returning to normal. The object remained completely still and silent. I considered stopping, but something held me back. As I drove past, I kept my eyes fixed on it, and by the time I was 10 miles down the road, it had vanished. When I mentioned this to a coworker, he laughed it off, suggesting I was tired or imagining things. However, another driver told me they'd seen something similar about a month earlier, speculating it might be a weather balloon or military test. But something didn't add up. I'd never seen a balloon sit so still and rotate like that, and the complete silence was unsettling. What struck me most was how unnaturally calm I felt. You'd expect to be terrified, but instead I was just quiet. It was like the object didn't want me to be scared, just to observe. After a few weeks, I started avoiding that route late at night. Then, one night around 2 a.m., returning from a friend's place, I noticed headlights behind me. The car slowed and stopped on the shoulder. I pulled over to check if everything was okay. The driver was Laura, a local who shared an eerily similar experience. She'd seen the same dark shape hovering over the highway and felt too unsettled to drive past it. We compared notes, both feeling like we were being watched by something waiting, though neither of us could explain what it was or why it was spinning so slowly. The next morning, I drove back with my phone camera, determined to capture evidence. But no matter how many times I passed that spot during daylight, nothing appeared. It was as if the shape only manifested in darkness. I never saw it again after that last encounter. Yet every time I drive that highway at night, I can't help but glance up, half expecting to see it hovering silently, rotating, watching. No lights, no sound, just waiting. 2 years back, I was living on the outskirts of Bell Hollow, Nebraska, after leaving Omaha when I hit 30. I'd rented a small house on a couple acres of land, still working remotely for my logistics company. The quiet suited me perfectly. Running was my daily ritual. Some days I'd go a few miles, other times pushing a full 13 if my body allowed. I preferred late runs, less sun, less traffic, more space to think. This particular night, the moon hung high and bright, almost full. The air was cool, ground dry with no wind stirring. My usual route followed a dirt road cutting through old farmland. Flat fields stretched out, overgrown with weeds, broken fences, and rusting irrigation equipment long abandoned. I'd loop down the county line, circle 2 old silos, and return along a narrow creekside path. My headlamp stayed mostly unused. The moonlight was more than enough. About 3 miles in, I stopped to stretch near a fence break where the trail opened into a field. The night sounds were crystal clear, crickets chirping, distant dogs barking, a barn owl calling somewhere left of me. The air felt impossibly clean and crisp. As I resumed jogging, something caught my eye. A dark, narrow ripple moving left to right across the field, maybe 100 yards ahead. Initially, I thought it might be a deer or coyote, but its movement was wrong. It didn't leap or walk, it glided, skimming the grass surface with impossible speed. In just seconds, it covered 60 feet and vanished behind some scrub brush near the far fence line. I stopped, pulling out my earbuds. Total silence. No rustling, no movement, not even a bent blade of grass marked its path. I waited, eyes straining in the moonlight, but nothing reappeared. Trying to rationalize, I told myself it was probably a bird or a strange optical illusion, maybe a shadow from an overhead plane. I looked up, half expecting to see aircraft lights, but the sky was empty, just stars and moonlight. My pace quickened afterward, not from fear exactly, but a strange tension. Something in my brain felt unsettled, urging me to keep moving. I looped past the silos and came back around to the trail behind my place. The creek runs alongside the path for about half a mile, with trees lining both sides. It's usually a peaceful route, but that night felt different. I kept glancing over my shoulder, not hearing anything specific. No snapping branches or footsteps. Yet something felt wrong. Just before reaching my driveway, I saw it again. This time, it was farther out across the creek. The shape moved against the water's flow, gliding fast and smooth like a black tarp being dragged through the grass. But this wasn't a tarp. It had no edges and made no sound. I stopped running and stared at where it had vanished. My arms tingled with goosebumps. I wasn't cold, just hyper-aware of every sound and silence surrounding me. When I got home, I did something unusual. I locked the door, something I rarely do unless leaving town. My dog, Cray, was inside, waiting. He didn't bark or pace, just stood by the door with raised ears and a low-hanging tail. I crouched down and scratched his neck. He leaned into me, seeming to want to hide behind me. The next night, I took the same route. Not to prove anything, really. Part of me just didn't want to surrender to whatever weirdness I'd experienced. I left earlier, just before sunset, telling myself I wanted more light, though I knew I was avoiding running in complete darkness. Everything seemed normal until I reached the field. At the familiar fence break, nothing moved, no shadows. But Cray, who I'd brought along this time, started acting strange. He's normally calm, doesn't even bark at deer, yet now he was whining and pulling at the leash. When we hit the field's edge, he stopped completely. Planting his feet, he pulled toward the road. I knelt down to comfort him, but he kept staring into the field's center. His ears were down, his body rigid. I looked too, seeing nothing. Yet my skin prickled. Not like being watched, but feeling exposed, as if standing on a stage before an invisible audience. I gave in. We turned around and ran the loop backward. Craig relaxed immediately once we were back under the tree cover. Something about that field had deeply unsettled him. I talked to Evan, my neighbor across the road. He's ex-Navy, a pretty rational guy who mostly spends time fishing or rebuilding old motors. When I asked if he'd ever seen anything weird near the old McCall field, he shrugged and mentioned seeing lights hovering over the ridge a couple nights last year. He thought they might be a drone or some weather phenomenon. When I pressed for details, he just said they were white and sat there silently. That night around 11, I took Cray out back to pee. With no streetlights, everything was dark except for the porch light and moonlight. He sniffed around as usual, then suddenly stopped and growled low and quiet, facing the field's direction. I scanned the horizon, seeing nothing. But a strange feeling gripped me, like being pulled forward horizontally, almost a weird vertigo. I went cold all over. Without really knowing why, I picked up Cray. He's not small, but I carried him inside and shut the door. After that night, I stopped running that path after dark. I stuck to the road or went out in mornings. I never saw the shape again, but on clear nights, I'd get that same unsettling feeling of being exposed, like something was watching me. I never saw it up close, never heard a sound. But when I think about how it moved so fast without disturbing the grass or creating wind, without even scaring the birds, something feels fundamentally wrong, like some unknown rule had been broken. The next morning, around 6:15, the dog was pacing. Her nails clicking against the floor woke me up, probably a raccoon or something moving in the yard. I decided to let her out early and then go back to sleep. While making coffee, I noticed her sniffing near the sliding door, tail stiff, ears up. It was that blue-gray time just before sunrise. Barefoot and holding my mug, I stepped out behind her. That's when I saw the yard. The grass looked different, darker, but not wet or shadowed. Just wrong, and not everywhere, just a large, distinct patch. When I first noticed it, the patch stretched from the middle of the lawn toward the fence, maybe 12 by 12 feet. The porch light cast a strange glow, making the substance look like fine black powder, almost like soot. At first, I mistook it for ash, which isn't uncommon during our summer wildfires when flakes sometimes land far from the actual burning. But this was different. It wasn't drifting down, it had already settled. The distribution was unnervingly precise, evenly sifted across the grass without wind streaks or clumps, as if someone had laid down a perfect tarp of powder and lifted it away cleanly. When I leaned down and touched it, the substance clung slightly to my fingertips, dry, fine, almost like graphite dust, no odor. My dog's behavior was equally strange. She remained frozen on the porch, tail low, refusing to move forward despite my calls. Eventually, she backed up and went inside. I stood there, uncertain, scanning the sky for any sign of smoke or jet trails. Nothing. The sky was clear, cold, and utterly still. I snapped a few pictures with my phone. The flash somewhat obscured the details, but the color shift was still apparent. I texted one to Marcy, my longtime neighbor, who always keeps tabs on neighborhood oddities like drones and power outages. She didn't respond, but it was early. Around 8:30, I went out for another look, and the substance was completely gone. Not blown away, not washed out. There hadn't been rain or wind. Simply vanished. The lawn looked pristine, even cleaner than before. No streaks, no damp spots, no footprints, not even mine. What truly unsettled me were the porch steps. I remembered walking barefoot through the substance earlier, recalling dark smudges on the top step when I went inside. Now those were gone too. I checked the floor inside. Nothing. No grit, no trail. I had planned to wipe it up later, but it was as if I'd never touched it. For a moment, I wondered if I'd imagined the entire incident. But the time-stamped photos on my phone told a different story. Clear evidence of something extraordinary that had occurred in my yard, then mysteriously disappeared without a trace. My dog's behavior changed completely after that morning. She refused to go outside for the rest of the day, sitting by the door and looking out, but backing away whenever I tried to coax her out. I even attempted to carry her into the yard once, but she squirmed out of my arms and ran back inside before I could take 2 steps. Around noon, I called Marcy. She mentioned her dog was acting strange too, low energy and avoiding the back fence we share. I kept my explanation vague, simply mentioning some black stuff on my grass that might have blown over from somewhere. She suggested it could be tree debris or mold, but didn't sound convinced. I spent the rest of the day inside, occasionally checking the yard through the window. The grass looked completely normal, as if nothing had happened. That night, I leashed up the dog for a walk instead of letting her out back. She usually loves sniffing around before bed, but this time she wouldn't even look toward the porch. Standing on the back steps in the dark, I noticed an eerie silence. No bugs, no crickets, just absolute quiet, like someone had muted the entire backyard. This continued for days. The grass never changed, showed no weird colors or dead spots, and no unusual smells appeared. But the dog's reaction persisted. A week later, she'd still only peek out the door before retreating to another room. I never discovered what had happened, whether something landed, was left behind, or emerged from the ground. I only knew it was there when I woke up, and then it wasn't, with only the dog's memory remaining. It was just after 10, one of those warm evenings where the air felt heavy and undecided about summer's end. I sat on the porch with the house, lights off, a beer unopened beside me, listening and watching the tree line beyond the field. Out here past town, the hills stretch far and quiet. My field sits across the road, with nothing but woods beyond. No neighbors anywhere. That's always been the draw. This particular night, something caught my eye that was different from the usual landscape. The cell tower sometimes creates strange light effects in the haze, but this wasn't like that. A solid orange light hung low over the field, maybe 20 feet up. Completely still. No flickering, no movement. At first I thought it might be a drone. People fly those everywhere now. I stepped out to get a better look. Silence surrounded me, but not a gradual silence. It was instant, like someone had hit a mute button the second my boot touched the dirt. No crickets, no frogs, no distant owl calls, just absolute quiet. Standing about 5 feet from the house, I watched the sphere. It glowed an ambient orange, but strangely, nothing around it seemed illuminated. The grass underneath looked unchanged. I called out softly, "Anyone there?" Silence answered. Walking forward, my boots crunched the dry grass, but the sound felt wrong, too sharp, too isolated, like I was the only thing making noise in the entire world. The light remained motionless, hanging there. Hard to judge its size, maybe a beach ball, maybe larger. No blinking lights, no propellers, no sound. Near the old broken fence post, I paused. I've never fixed that spot because deer jump it anyway. Leaning my hand against the post, I squinted, searching. Nothing moved. No wind, no grass rustling. Then I felt it, a vibration. Not a strong shake, but a low, steady hum like a phone on silent. I removed my hand, then placed it back, still vibrating. When I looked up, the sphere had shifted, not quickly, just a few feet higher and slightly left. I hadn't seen it move, but suddenly it was in a different position. That was enough. I backed away slowly, eyes locked on the light. I stood on the porch. Something felt off. The air wasn't cold or warm, just neutral, like everything had gone flat. Out in the field, something hung suspended, waiting, not moving, just existing. I heard a sound from inside the house. A floorboard creak, 2 steps past the entryway. Those familiar groans that always happen when someone walks in. I didn't go inside. One hand on the doorknob, the other hanging at my side, I looked back. The sphere was gone, not faded, just absent. No night sounds returned. I stayed on the porch for 10 more minutes, dead quiet. When I finally went inside, I turned on every single light. I walked through the whole house, checking doors and windows. Nothing was out of place, nothing missing. But the air felt unnaturally cold, like an AC was blasting, except it wasn't even on. That night, I slept with lights blazing. The next morning, I went to the field where I'd seen it. No burnt grass, no marks, just one strange detail. The fence post I'd leaned on was loose, shaken from its base. Long, shallow scratches ran along one side, clean marks, as if something smooth and hard had brushed against it. I kept quiet. What could I possibly tell anyone? 2 nights later, I was back on the porch, beer in hand. Everything felt normal. Crickets chirped. Then my phone buzzed, a notification. Motion detected on the front porch. Weird, since there's usually no service out here. My old camera only records clips and sends alerts when something moves directly in front of it. I opened the app. A 5-second clip, pitch black, nothing visible. But the audio caught something. Not footsteps, not animals. Just a low vibration, barely picked up by the microphone, almost like it emerged from the wall itself. Then silence. No more alerts. We were night fishing at Lake Etterton when something strange happened. Me and my cousin Neil had settled into our usual spot, a small clearing with a log by the water's edge. It was late September, that perfect time after the first cold snap, when mosquitoes die, but bass are still biting. We'd arrived around 8, set up our rods, and cracked open a couple of beers. The lake was big but shallow, surrounded by thick pine woods. We were on the south side where the bank slopes into reeds, parked on a gravel pull-off, and hiked a short way to our spot. By 10:30, we'd been sitting quietly for about an hour and a half, with only crickets and occasional water splashes breaking the silence. Neil was fiddling with his fishing reel when I noticed a strange glow through the trees across the lake. At first, I thought it was moonlight, but the actual moon was behind us, high and almost full. This was something else entirely. A soft white-blue light, hazy and undefined. I tapped Neil, and we watched in silence. The light looked like a massive, faint orb, about the size of a water tower from our perspective. It seemed stationary at first, hovering above the tree line, but gradually we realized it was moving, slowly, lazily, drifting downward inch by inch. There was something unnerving about it. No shadows, no water ripples, no sound at all. Just this strange presence that felt completely out of place. Neil whispered, "What the hell is that?" I had no answer. It wasn't bright enough to hurt our eyes, but it felt wrong. Not like a spotlight, not a flare, too smooth for a drone. After that night, everything changed. I stayed inside for a week, turning on the porch light every evening. Nothing else appeared on the camera. No lights, no sounds, but I still checked the field every morning. Sometimes the post looks slightly shifted, like it's been touched or watched, or maybe just remembered. The lake was perfectly still, not even a whisper of wind in the reeds. No crickets chirped. We watched a light descend, unlike any aircraft, just a perfect, dim, round shape. It touched the treetops and stopped, hovering maybe 10 feet above the pines. I strained to hear something, a distant hum, an engine, any animal reaction, but there was nothing. Then it sank straight down behind the trees. No wobbling, no drifting, just a slow, vertical drop until it vanished completely. The light on the water disappeared with it. Neil stood up. "We should go," he said, not scared, just unsettled. I felt the same way. It wasn't panic, but that instinct you get when you realize a thunderstorm is closer than you thought and you're holding a metal rod. Nothing had technically happened, but we wanted to leave. We packed quickly, not running, just efficiently tossing gear into backpacks and making sure we left no trash. Neil grabbed the tackle box. I took the fishing rods. The walk back to the truck felt longer than usual. I kept looking behind us into the trees, not sure what I was searching for. The moon was out, but everything seemed darker somehow, less colorful. At the truck, we paused before getting in. Neil asked if I wanted to sleep in the cab or head home. "Let's drive," I said. About 15 minutes into the drive, on a 2-lane road with no traffic, the dash lights flickered. The radio cut out and headlights dimmed like the battery was dying. Neil smacked the dash off and everything returned to normal. He laughed it off, but gave me a strange look, waiting for me to speak first. The rest of the ride was silent. The next day, Neil revealed he'd seen something similar before. Years ago, fishing with his dad near the same lake, he'd witnessed the same soft, glowing ball of light that hovered and then sank into the woods without a trace. When I asked why he'd never mentioned it before, he just shrugged. "Didn't seem real," he said. That response stuck with me. I was out in my backyard around midnight, setting up my camera to capture the moon. Astronomy had been a hobby of mine for a while, and I loved practicing with my own equipment whenever possible. The moon that night was nearly full, hanging low and bright in a clear sky. My goal was to get some close-up shots of the craters and shadows across its surface. I'd carefully positioned my tripod and attached my DSLR with a telephoto lens. Living on the edge of a small town meant the light pollution wasn't ideal, but the moon's brightness made that less of an issue. I was meticulously adjusting the settings, ensuring the exposure was just right, and waiting for a thin haze to clear. After a few test shots, I switched to continuous shooting mode, planning to capture multiple images and select the best one later. I wasn't expecting anything unusual, just some good photographs to work with. The night was incredibly quiet, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves in a light breeze. Through the camera's LCD, I kept a close watch on the moon, waiting for that perfect moment of shadow and contrast. Suddenly, something caught my eye moving across the moon's surface in the live view. It wasn't just a spot or a mark, but a distinct dark shape, definitely in motion. I stopped and zoomed in for a closer look. The shape was massive, too large to be a bird or airplane. I considered it might be a satellite or some space debris, but its movement was peculiar. The silhouette was smooth, almost oval-shaped, gliding slowly across the bright lunar surface. I continued taking pictures, determined to capture its entire trajectory. In less than a minute, it crossed from one edge of the moon to the other and then vanished. Weeks later, I returned to the spot during daylight, scanning the surrounding area. The trees across the lake looked unchanged. No burn marks, no flattened brush, nothing unusual stood out. I walked through the muddy woods where the light had disappeared, finding no tracks or signs of disturbance. I haven't been night fishing since. Not out of fear, exactly. I just haven't felt like it. We never saw it again. Disappeared behind the other side. The photos puzzled me. I carefully checked the lens, wiping it down, but the shape remained consistent in every shot. Downloading the images to my computer, I zoomed in and studied the details. The edges were smooth yet distinct, unlike any typical astronomical object. I couldn't match the shape to known sky phenomena. Planes, birds, or satellites didn't explain what I saw. The dark form was too large, moving differently from typical celestial movements. Something about the images unsettled me, a quiet heaviness, like an unseen presence watching from above. The next night, I returned to the same spot, hoping to capture more evidence. The sky was clear, but nothing appeared, just the moon, silent and still. Days passed, and I couldn't shake my curiosity. I showed the photos to astronomer friends, who suggested explanations like cloud formations or camera glitches. None satisfied me. My night sky observations intensified. Strange lights began catching my attention, moving silently at impossible speeds. Too slow for planes, too fast for conventional aircraft. They'd hover, shift direction without sound, vanishing the moment I tried to document them. Late one night, while watching the moon without my camera, a faint humming caught my ear. Low and distant, almost like a far-off generator. The feeling of being watched returned. I scanned the empty street. Dark houses, no cars, no people. Only the moon's bright glow overhead. A strange presence lingered in the following week. Something just beyond my peripheral vision. Never close, yet always near. My sleep deteriorated. I'd wake up sweating, heart racing, with no memory of dreams. Occasional time lapses confused me, moments where seconds or minutes seemed to slip away unnoticed. One night, After a photography session, I left my camera on the tripod outside. The next morning, I discovered something strange in the footage. Just before a dark shape appeared, a faint shimmer warped the air above the treetops. This wasn't a reflection or glare. The atmosphere seemed to bend momentarily before returning to normal. I stopped taking late-night photos after that. Whatever was up there felt like it didn't want me watching too closely. The pictures remain on my hard drive, and I occasionally review them, trying to make sense of what I saw. A dark shape moved slowly across the moon, larger and more bizarre than anything it should be. Sometimes when I look up at the night sky, I wonder if it's still there, watching from somewhere just beyond my perception. My solo hiking trip to the Pine Ridge Trail east of Asheville started normally enough. Early September brought cool, clear weather perfect for camping. I'd built a good fire the night before and was enjoying the solitude with Rosie, my golden retriever mix. Around 9 a.m., I set out to hike to the overlook, leaving Rosie tethered while I explored a rocky slope and small stream around 11:30. When I returned, something was immediately off. My entire campsite had been meticulously rearranged into a perfect circle. Every item, backpack, tent poles, shoes, stove, and fuel canister, was precisely positioned. Rosie was now loose, standing in the center of this strange arrangement, looking confused. Faint scorch marks darkened the grass beneath the circle. They weren't heavy burns, just a brittle, darkened pattern like a barely caught campfire. No ash, no smoke smell, just those subtle rings pressed into the dirt. I initially wondered if other campers had passed through, but the area was completely empty, with no signs of anyone else's presence. The morning hike started normally, but something felt off from the beginning. At our campsite, an unusual arrangement caught my attention. No footprints, no trash, no sign of human presence, except this mysterious setup. When I began gathering my gear, Rosie's behavior changed. She growled softly and kept staring intensely into the surrounding trees. An eerie silence enveloped the forest. Typically, this trail buzzes with morning life. Bird calls, rustling animals, background sounds. Now, everything was completely still. No wind, no insects, no wildlife. Only occasional twig snaps happened when I moved. The silence felt unnatural and oppressive. Throughout the entire time, I sensed something watching me from just beyond the tree line, maybe 40 yards away. Each time I looked, nothing was there. Rosie stayed extremely close, her ears pricked, muscles tense. The hike back felt long and unsettling, with that strange silence trailing behind us. Back home that evening, an odd discovery awaited. While unpacking my backpack, I found a small patch of scorched grass stuck to my water bottle case. It was dry, brittle, and carried a faint burnt smell. I couldn't recall where it came from. Rosie seemed exhausted but restless, pacing between rooms and staring intently at shadows I couldn't perceive. The next day, I returned with my friend Tom, an experienced local hiker. We found the campsite and confirmed the strange scorch marks. Tom examined them closely, noting an unusual pattern, a rough circle with tiny radiating arcs, almost like a deliberate symbol. Neither of us recognized it from any camping or survival markings. We attempted to photograph the area, but the images were strange. My phone's pictures showed nothing, while Tom's captured blurry, flickering light patches that seemed to shift when viewed. I was driving back from my sister's place in Dayton, taking the back roads like always to dodge those pesky tolls. It was just past 1 a.m. in early March, cold but not snowing. A weird mist hung low over the fields, creating this eerie haze that made everything feel off. Not quite fog, but something that made the world seem unnaturally quiet. Halfway between Westport and Tiverton, I was in the middle of nowhere. Two-lane asphalt stretched ahead, no lights, just trees on both sides like dark walls. The heater hummed low, and some oldies station from Providence played in the background. I wasn't really paying attention until the song suddenly cut out mid-chorus. Silence hung for maybe 3 seconds. Then this sound started. Not static exactly, but a rush of air mixed with whispers. Imagine 10 people murmuring in another room, their words just beyond understanding. When I hit the seek button, every single frequency carried the same strange hiss-whisper blend. FM, AM, it didn't matter. Frustrated, I tried shutting the radio off and on. Nothing changed. I unplugged my phone to try Bluetooth, but the screen just froze. About a mile later, I pulled over onto a small grass patch where a dirt path disappeared into the woods. No shoulder, just an empty space. I killed the engine and listened. Complete silence. No crickets, no wind, not even the usual engine cooling sounds. The radio continued its low whisper. Stepping out of the car, I hoped to find some source of interference. Something felt deeply wrong. Since that night, I've kept Rosie, my dog, close. Every time I'm in the woods now, I feel watched. Not by animals, but by something else. I can't explain what happened that morning, who or what moved my gear, or why it was positioned so strangely. It doesn't feel like a normal prank or mistake. It just feels wrong. The road was deserted with no lights or houses in sight. My phone showed no signal, not even the emergency SOS, which bothered me more than the radio. I'd driven this route countless times before, and there was always at least one bar of service. The cold hit me the moment I closed the door. It wasn't freezing, but definitely colder than March should be. A thick mist clung to my clothes like ocean air, but without any salt or smell. As I drove slowly, the pressure in my ears grew, similar to ascending a mountain, noticeable but not painful. Cracking the window did nothing to change it. About 5 or 6 miles later, strange light reflections began flickering just past the trees. They weren't headlights, but quick, random glints, almost like someone waving a mirror. The radio suddenly grew louder on its own, the whispers becoming clearer. I could swear I heard a voice say, "Turn just once." The screen remained lit, frozen on station 91.1, while the noise seemed to amplify. That's when I saw him, a figure standing motionless near the white line. A guy in a hoodie, hood up, with jeans soaked to the knees, facing away toward the woods. I stopped about 30 yards back, car idling, not honking or moving. When I looked down for a moment and then back up, he had vanished. Not walked away, but completely disappeared. The spot was empty, with no movement or sound in the trees. I began backing up slowly, then faster. Something told me not to pass that spot, not for any logical reason, just a deep, instinctive feeling. I left my sister's place in Hutchinson around 11:40 p.m. on one of those summer nights that never fully cool off, even after the sun's long gone. Dry heat clung to everything, especially the inside of my truck, which hadn't seen working AC in about a year. Windows down, a warm breeze kept me from sweating through my shirt. The drive from Hutch back to my place in Nickerson is usually around 35 minutes, unless you get stuck behind a tractor or someone hauling a camper. It's just flat, open Kansas highway most of the way, with a few grain elevators breaking up the horizon and long stretches of soy fields on either side. About 5 or 6 miles out of town, a bright light caught my eye in the sky ahead. At first, I assumed it was a plane, not unusual with the Wichita Airport an hour or so southeast, but something was different. It wasn't blinking, just sitting there, bright and still, maybe a little bigger than the usual plane light. White, not bluish like a star. 10 more miles down the road, and it was still there. Same position, same brightness. I started wondering if it might be Venus, but something felt off. Too low, too bright. That stretch between Medora and Yagi is boring as hell at night, so I kept glancing up every few minutes. The light remained unchanged. Eventually, I turned around in a gravel driveway about a quarter-mile back and headed the way I came. The mist started thinning out after a few minutes, and the pressure in my ears eased up. About a mile later, the radio suddenly switched stations like it had just unfrozen, playing commercials for a used car lot. My phone buzzed with a backlog of notifications. Everything came back to life like nothing had happened. I pulled off at a 24-hour gas station on Route 6 and sat in the lot for maybe 20 minutes, engine running. Didn't go inside, just sat there. The radio worked fine. Bluetooth worked. Phone had full bars. I've driven that road since, once during the day, once late at night, just to check. Nothing strange either time. No mist, no guy on the roadside. Radio stayed normal. I don't drive it anymore, though. Even during the day, it feels off, like I'm not supposed to be there. I was driving along a familiar route, the night dark and quiet, when something caught my eye. A light hovered just above the tree line to the northwest, always a little ahead of me. Curious, I tested its movement by slowing down, and it seemed to slow with me. When I sped up, it matched my pace, maintaining its position. At first, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was just a star or a planet, something my mind was fixating on because I was alone in the darkness. I passed landmarks I knew well: the old silo with its collapsed roof, the abandoned produce stand, the turnout where teenagers used to hang out. Through it all, the light remained, almost like it was watching or guiding me. I realized the radio was off, and when I turned it on, only static and a muffled country song came through. I switched it back off, trying to convince myself this was nothing unusual. But as I approached the river bend near Sand Hill State Park, something changed. A strange pressure built behind my eyes, not painful, but thick and uncomfortable. My ears popped inexplicably, despite no change in altitude. Needing to prove to myself that this was just my imagination, I pulled into a gravel turnout by an old pump station. The engine died, and with it, all sound. No wind, no breeze, just absolute silence. I stepped out and looked up, expecting to see the light. Instead, it was gone. Completely. Not dimmed, not hidden behind clouds, just absent. I walked around the truck, scanning the sky. Only ordinary stars were visible, a few faint points of light from Hutch's ambient glow. Nothing like the bright, low-hanging light from before. For 2 full minutes, I stood listening. No insects, no frogs, no rustling grass, as if the entire world was holding its breath. Suddenly, my phone buzzed in the truck, startling me. I checked it. No service. I work nights as a security guard at an old, mostly abandoned airfield on the outskirts of town. The job is usually quiet, but that night was different. It all started with a missed notification from an unknown number. No message, just an alert. I'd experienced similar glitches in areas with poor signal before, so I tried to brush it off. After restarting my car and getting back on the road, something felt off. The air suddenly changed, becoming cooler. My windows started to fog up, and when I turned on the defrost, I saw it. The light was back, but different this time. Higher and smaller, it seemed to have pulled further into the sky, yet somehow remain directly in front of me. No matter how I drove, slowing down, speeding up, or curving along the highway, the light maintained its position. This unnatural alignment was what truly unsettled me. As I turned onto Sterling Road, approaching my house, it continued hovering just above the tree line. When I pulled into my driveway and cut the engine, I watched through the windshield. My porch light was on. I could see familiar landmarks: the mailbox, front steps, my neighbor's old swing set across the field. The skylight remained motionless, appearing smaller but still fixed in its exact spot. The moment I stepped out of the car, it vanished. I went inside quickly, locked up, and spent the rest of the night watching from a darkened window. Nothing else happened that night, though sleep was difficult. The next day, I did my research. Weather apps, flight trackers, nothing showed up. Clear skies, no alerts. I even called a pilot friend who suggested it might be a drone or weather balloon, but his tone suggested he wasn't convinced himself. Months have passed since that drive. I've traveled the same route multiple times, day and night, and never saw the light again. But something changed. I avoid that turnout near the pump station now. When I pass by, I keep my eyes straight ahead and just keep driving. Montana's Cedar Creek Airfield isn't what it used to be. These days, the runways sit mostly empty, with only a few small planes breaking the silence, mostly private pilots or crop dusters during summer months. Rusting hangars and cracked pavement are all that remain of its busier past. My job is simple: watch over this forgotten place and make sure no one wanders in after hours. The night shift from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. is my domain, with Juno, my German Shepherd, as my only companion. She's always alert and shares my dislike of the cold. Early October nights here are brutal, turning the airfield into a stark, exposed landscape where even your own footsteps sound alien. It was a foggy morning, around 5:30 a.m., when something unusual caught my eye. From the control tower, I was sipping lukewarm coffee and scanning security monitors. Most cameras showed nothing but empty asphalt and dead grass, but the camera pointing down the longest runway, typically used for takeoffs, revealed something strange. Mounted 20 feet up on a pole, the camera gave a wide view of the concrete. A faint shape sat halfway down the runway. Not quite a shadow, but something odd, too smooth and round to be a car or debris. Definitely not like any plane I'd seen here before. I zoomed in, and the shape remained. a dark silhouette against the cold runway, motionless and without any lights. Juno suddenly stiffened and let out a soft growl. That wasn't like her. She's typically calm during work, so her reaction made me uneasy. I grabbed my flashlight and coat, deciding to investigate in person. Outside, the fog was thick, carrying the damp smell of earth and old fuel. Juno followed close, her tail down but ears alert. As I walked toward the runway, the mysterious shape seemed to grow larger. I tried to rationalize it, maybe some old equipment or abandoned machinery. I spotted something in the fog near the runway. At first, I thought it might be a weather balloon. As I got closer, the fog thinned just enough to reveal details. What I saw definitely wasn't any machine I recognized. It was low to the ground, about the size of a small van, with a surface that looked bizarre. The object was matte black, almost like it was absorbing light instead of reflecting it. No markings, no lights. Nothing made sense. I stopped about 30 feet away and shined my flashlight at it. The beam didn't behave normally. It seemed like the object was swallowing the light completely. Juno was right beside me, no longer growling, but just staring intently. When I pulled out my phone to take a picture, the screen went black. Dead. No signal, no power. I figured the cold might be affecting the battery. Then, as I took a step back, the thing simply vanished. No sound, no flash, just gone. I blinked and looked around, but the runway was empty again, nothing but cracked concrete and drifting fog. My heart was racing as I stood there for a minute. I tried to call dispatch on the radio, but it was dead too. I reported that I'd keep watch and headed back to the tower. Inside, I checked the security footage, hoping to capture whatever I'd seen. That's when things got even stranger. The footage from 5:32 a.m. to 5:33 a.m., exactly when I was outside, was completely corrupted. Static and glitching pixels covered the screen, like a chunk of the file had been deliberately erased. Every other camera's footage was perfectly fine. I downloaded the clip, thinking it might be a technical error. But the corruption didn't look random. It seemed intentional. I ran recovery software, but all I got were scrambled, distorted frames with weird pixel patterns. No recognizable shapes, no movement. When I showed it to my supervisor, he just shrugged it off. Old equipment can be weird, he said. Maybe a faulty cable or interference. But I couldn't shake the feeling that what I'd seen wasn't just some forgotten piece of equipment. The next day, I checked the area in daylight. Nothing unusual. No tire tracks, no footprints, no signs anything had been there. Juno was different too. She refused to go near that part of the runway, growling low if I tried to get her closer. I kept watching the footage every day after work, hoping for some hint of what happened. But that 1-minute glitch remained a mystery. I was hauling produce from Fresno to Boise, a route I knew well. My 2016 Freightliner Cascadia was reliable, nothing fancy. This night was different, because Rizzo, my mutt of a dog, part shepherd and part mystery, was riding along. My sister was out of town, so he came with me. The drive through northern Nevada was quiet, as always. Winnemucca was the last point with decent cell coverage, and after that, hours could pass without seeing another vehicle. I left around 7:30 p.m., hoping to reach the Idaho border before sunrise. The night was clear and cool, moonless and still. Something caught my eye first. A constant light in the upper right corner of my windshield. It wasn't like a typical aircraft. No blinking, no drifting, just hanging there, perfectly positioned about 40 degrees up, moving exactly in sync with my truck. Rizzo noticed it before I did. He sat up, ears back, intensely alert, which wasn't like him with planes or headlights. I checked my GPS tablet with its radar overlay. Nothing showed up. No aircraft, just empty airspace around my position. The light was too bright, too close to be a satellite. As I drove, it remained. Rounding bends, changing elevations, slowing down or speeding up, it adjusted perfectly. Always maintaining the same distance, never getting closer. Weeks later, things got stranger. No more signals, no unusual shapes. Sometimes in the thick fog at night, I glimpse a dark form at the runway's edge. The cameras never catch it, always that same glitchy gap. Juno, my dog, won't go near that part of the airfield. I can't explain what I saw. I don't know why the footage got corrupted, but occasionally I think about that silent, dark shape sitting in the fog, vanishing like it was never meant to be seen. Around 1:30 a.m., I pulled into a turnout near a rest stop east of Elko. No other trucks were around. I stepped out and looked straight up. A white light hung suspended, motionless. It could have been the size of a drone or a city bus. Hard to tell without a reference point. The light was like a spotlight behind thick fog, even though the sky was completely clear. No beam, no noise. I stood watching for about 3 minutes. It didn't blink or shift. No hum, no rotor wash, nothing. Rizzo wouldn't leave the cab, standing stiff by the passenger door and breathing softly. I leaned against the bumper and checked my phone. No bars. When I opened my weather app, it froze. We started rolling again, and the light stayed with us like nothing had changed. We went another 40 miles, me glancing up every few minutes, Rizzo sitting rigid and watching through the window. I tried scanning the CB for chatter, only static. Right before the Pequot summit, where the road curves along a ridge, I looked up again. The light was simply gone. No fade, no movement, just not there anymore. It didn't return. Checking the GPS revealed no aircraft, no anomalies, but something was off. My arrival time had shifted by over an hour, like I'd gained time instead of losing it. My odometer and fuel usage seemed normal, but the onboard computer showed I'd left Elko an hour earlier than I actually did. I pulled into a truck stop outside Wells and idled, trying to make sense of it. Rizzo finally lay down, but kept facing the windshield, watching. When I filled up, the pump kept clicking off as if the tank was full, even though I knew it wasn't. 3 restarts were needed to top off. Later, the fuel log showed the tank was full before I even started pumping. I chalked it up to a sensor issue, another strange occurrence that night. I finished the run, dropped the trailer, and drove back south a few days later. Clear skies, nothing in the air, everything normal. But I still don't know what I saw up there. And that time gap continues to puzzle me. Late summer storms are common in Cedar Ridge, and power outages aren't unusual. But this night was different. Around 9:15 p.m., I was on my porch, watching my terrier Sprocket chase moths in the porch light. The air was thick with the smell of wet grass and ozone after an earlier thunderstorm. Suddenly, everything went dark. Street lamps, porch lights, the entire block, all at once. When I tried to check my phone, the screen went black with no service. 17 seconds later, the power snapped back on, but something was off. The neighborhood security cameras were frozen, each feed paused at exactly the same moment. I noticed this first when Jenna's porch cam feed restarted, revealing a bright white dot hovering above the old church steeple on Main Street. Grabbing my hiking binoculars, I studied the dot. It was perfectly still, shimmering like a heat haze, except this was the middle of the night. The dot reflected streetlights and stars, but something about the reflection felt wrong, like a distorted funhouse mirror against the sky. I called Jenna immediately. "Did you see that?" I asked. The cameras had frozen for exactly 17 seconds before revealing this strange dot. Her low-voiced "yeah" confirmed I wasn't imagining things. I've kept a log of this incident. My computer, which I've since updated, still shows an unexplained hour that I can't account for, just in case. The neighborhood cameras all showed the same strange thing in the same spot. Neither of us knew exactly why we both checked them, just some weird habit. But the synchronization felt off. She was too spooked to go outside, so I stepped off the porch with Sprocket. My dog's nose twitched and his ears pulled back, like he was sensing something I couldn't. A distant lawnmower hummed somewhere down the street, which struck me as odd for that time of night. The dot remained perfectly still. I walked toward the church, eyes locked on it. The sky was cloudy but unnaturally motionless, almost like time itself had slowed. The air felt heavier, thicker than normal. Sprocket kept glancing up but stayed silent, not barking or growling. My phone camera couldn't focus, constantly shifting and refocusing. The dot started shimmering, flickering at the edge, F visibility. When a car drove past, its headlights caught the dot differently. Not like a solid object, but more like a thin layer of oil on water, rippling in ways that didn't match the car's movement. Mrs. Lark stood frozen in her front yard, mouth slightly open, staring upward. When I waved, she blinked and looked down, seeming to snap out of a trance. We didn't speak. The weirdness hung in the air, and we both seemed to understand that watching and waiting was best. Minutes passed. The dot began to fade, not by moving away, but by gradually dimming like a star disappearing behind clouds, except the sky remained clear. Then it was gone. Everything returned to normal. Porch lights buzzed. Street lamps glowed yellow. Sprocket stopped staring and resumed sniffing the grass as if nothing had happened. That's when I noticed my phone's time, 9:49 p.m. But something was wrong. I was certain I'd been outside only about 15 minutes, yet somehow almost 30 minutes had passed. The night everything changed started with a strange occurrence. Clocks around the house seemed normal, but something felt off. I texted Jenna to confirm the time, and she said 9:50. We both agreed the clocks looked fine, but a nagging feeling persisted that something wasn't right. The next day, I checked the porch cameras, and what I found was unsettling. Every camera in the neighborhood showed the same bizarre sequence: a blackout, a freeze, and then a bright dot appearing in the exact same spot. The footage was identical across all cameras, frozen for precisely 17 seconds before the unblinking, unchanging dot faded out. I tried comparing the dot to known phenomena: satellites, drones, fireworks, but nothing matched. More strange details emerged. No noise, no nearby aircraft, no searchlights or police activity. Yet every camera in the neighborhood experienced the same blackout and freeze. Neighbors were strangely silent about the incident. A few mentioned the blackout casually, but quickly dismissed the camera glitch and the light. One neighbor suggested a power grid issue, but none could explain how the light appeared so clearly on cameras facing different directions. Mrs. Lark admitted feeling anxious that night, like someone was watching. I couldn't shake the memory of the dot, how it reflected the stars oddly, shimmered like heat haze, and made time feel slower. Something was definitely not right. Later that night, I discovered a voicemail on my phone. It was from an unknown number, time-stamped at 2:41 p.m., a time when my phone was completely powered off. Sprocket won't go near the porch light since that night, and I find myself constantly checking the cameras, hoping not to see that frozen moment again. I can't explain exactly what happened. Maybe it was an unusual atmospheric event or a trick of light. But I know what I saw, and I know it wasn't normal. My phone had been off most of the day. I'd switched it off earlier after a dentist appointment and kept it silenced throughout the afternoon to dodge the constant spam calls that had been driving me crazy. When I finally powered it back on around 5, that's when I noticed the notification. At first, nothing seemed strange. Maybe a glitch or a weird cell tower issue with the timestamp. But when I played the voicemail, the phone slipped from my hand. It started with static, soft and faint, like a poorly tuned radio signal. Then came a breath, or something that sounded like breathing. And then my name, whispered, drawn out, right against the microphone. The voice sounded like mine, but not quite. There was my signature rasp, the one that comes out when I'm tired or my allergies are acting up. A steady wind sound hung in the background, not rising or falling, just constant. The entire message lasted maybe 9 seconds, just static, a whisper, and that unmoving wind. I cranked up the volume. My name, Rachel, was barely audible, spoken softly as if breathed right against the phone. The rest of the whisper dissolved into that unchanging wind sound. Checking my call log revealed nothing, just an unknown number, incoming at 2:41 p.m. The strangest part? No visual transcript. While most voicemails get automatically transcribed now, this one simply said, "Unable to transcribe message." I tried calling my own number from the landline. Everything seemed normal. I attempted to forward the message to my laptop, hoping to run some audio filters, but the file was unreadable, a 0-byte attachment that might as well not exist. Each time I played the message, it seemed to degrade. The whisper became fainter, the wind more muffled. By 10 p.m., the entire message had vanished. I hadn't deleted it. I hadn't archived it. It simply disappeared. My phone had been acting weird, and I couldn't figure out why. It started with a voicemail that seemed to come out of nowhere. I checked every folder and even called my voicemail directly, but there was nothing. Was it a spoofed call? Maybe someone had used a voice clip of my name, but I don't post any voice or video content online. That night, around midnight, I went to bed and left my phone on the nightstand. At 2:43 a.m., the screen lit up silently. The voicemail icon was back. I hesitated to touch it, just watching and waiting. When I finally picked it up, It showed an unknown number with one new voicemail. The timestamp was almost exactly 12 hours after the first incident. This message was longer, 17 seconds of increasingly loud static. I heard a shuffling noise like fabric against a microphone, then my name whispered more clearly. Something else followed, a low, rhythmic sound that didn't quite sound human. It was mechanical, like an attempted imitation of breathing. 3 beats. Pause. 3 beats. Pause. I saved the message and tucked the phone in a drawer, unable to sleep. That pattern kept echoing in my head, seeming to match my own breathing. I turned on music to drown it out. By morning, the voicemail had vanished without a trace. I went to work and acted normally, checking my phone hourly. Nothing happened during the day. But that night, at 2:41 a.m., things got stranger. The phone lit up with a text from an unknown source. One word, listening. I stared until the screen dimmed, feeling oddly blank rather than scared. When I tried to reply, the message wouldn't send, and the entire thread disappeared. I turned off the phone, removed the battery, and left it off all night. The next day, I took it to the Verizon store. They ran diagnostics and found nothing unusual. No malware, no recent updates. Everything appeared completely normal. I bought a burner phone that day, just one of those cheap pay-as-you-go devices. I gave the number to only 2 people, my sister and my boss. I left my other phone off and tucked away in a drawer at home. When I asked the carrier about the unknown number that had been calling, they said it was probably a spoof or a network error. They offered to wipe the phone, but I declined. A week passed with no incidents. Then one night, the burner phone rang. No caller ID, just a single ring. I didn't answer, and it went to voicemail. When I checked the message, there was no voice, only that wind sound. Exactly the same as before. Flat and steady, like it was recorded in a vacuum. No whisper, just wind. This phone had no internet, no apps, no Bluetooth. Nothing that should have allowed anyone to trace it or send something strange. It wasn't even registered under my name. I still keep the phone, still have that voicemail. Sometimes I play it just to confirm I didn't imagine it. The sound never changes. Not louder, not quieter, always exactly the same, as if suspended in time. It happened on one of those late afternoons in early fall, when the sun NES low, but the air remains warm and comfortable. I was out in a big open field just outside town, flying my drone. I like this spot because nothing tall interferes with the signal, and the sky is usually clear enough for good footage. For about 20 minutes, I'd been doing slow sweeping shots of the trees and horizon, testing a new camera angle for a project. The wind was light, just enough to ruffle the grass tops. Everything was quiet, except for the soft buzz of the drone's motors. Suddenly, the controller's screen flickered and went black. The drone lost signal. I assumed it was a brief glitch, maybe interference or a weak signal spot. I tried moving around, waving the controller, attempting to re-establish contact. Nothing. The feed didn't return. Normally, when this happens, the drone automatically returns home. But this time, the controller was completely silent. No automatic return, no warning beep. I kept checking the screen, hoping for any sign of life, but it remained blank. Since I wasn't far from the drone, maybe a couple 100 feet away, I started walking toward its last known position, scanning the field for any trace. I was flying my drone over a field mostly covered in grass, with a few dirt patches and scattered wildflowers. My attention was fixed on the sky, wondering if something was still out there. Eventually, I spotted the drone near the field's edge, just beyond a small cluster of trees. Physically, the drone looked undamaged. No broken parts or visible harm, which made the complete signal loss even more puzzling. I retrieved the drone and took it back to my truck, connecting the SD card to my laptop to review the footage. Initially, everything appeared normal. The video showed smooth, steady shots of the field and treetops, just as I remembered. But about 2 minutes before the feed cut out, the camera suddenly pointed straight upward. The sky was filled with thickening gray clouds, slowly drifting across the late afternoon landscape. A peculiar shape caught my eye within those clouds. It looked metallic, but didn't resemble any aircraft or weather balloon I'd encountered before. Not quite a solid object. It appeared more like a dim, reflective blur with defined edges, almost like a thin, flat panel suspended in the air. Its movement was strange, mostly drifting, then abruptly shifting direction with sharp, precise changes. The drone captured this anomaly for roughly 10 seconds. Then, without warning, the feed simply ended. No static, no gradual disruption, just a complete cutoff. I repeatedly watched the footage, desperately trying to rationalize it as a light trick or unusual cloud formation. But its movement was too deliberate, too calculated to be natural. The following day, I returned to the field, hoping to uncover the source of the interference. Something felt off immediately. The usual ambient sounds, bird calls, wind rustling through grass, were eerily absent. The entire area seemed to be holding its breath. When I attempted to fly the drone again, the controls felt unusually heavy, as if encountering invisible resistance. The signal was weak, and the screen occasionally flickered with faint static. As I began packing up, something caught my eye near the spot where I'd found the drone the previous day. A pale blue light hovering low over the grass, subtle yet unmistakable. The light was more like a soft glow, pulsing twice slowly. I froze, wondering if it was just a trick of the light, maybe a reflection from a distant window or far-off car headlights. But there were no cars or houses nearby. Suddenly, the light vanished, as if someone had switched it off. After that, an unsettling feeling crept over me. Every time I looked toward the sky, I felt tracked by something invisible. I kept checking my phone, hoping for a message or call, but it remained silent. The following nights were stellus. Strange sounds, a low humming, occasional tapping, seemed to hover just outside my window, never quite clear. I stopped flying the drone, needing time to process what I'd seen or determine if I was imagining things. Weeks later, I returned to the same field late in the afternoon. I set up the drone, looked around, and waited. Nothing happened. No weird lights, no buzzing, no interference. I flew for half an hour, captured some good shots, and brought the drone home. Yet, I still can't explain what was in those clouds or why my drone lost contact. Sometimes, when I look up at a clear sky, I catch a glimpse of something moving differently, not like the wind or birds, something I don't understand. That night, I was in the living room watching a show on mute, some mindless program providing background noise. My wife had gone to bed earlier, and I was doing what we all do, telling myself just one more episode, barely paying attention. Our daughter was small then. We had a decent baby monitor with a video screen, its camera clipped to the curtain rod, angled down at her crib. She'd gone to sleep around 9:30, no issues. She was always a good sleeper, still is mostly. I glanced at the monitor periodically, checking the grainy grayscale night vision feed. You couldn't make out details, just shapes and movement. The baby monitor's screen caught my attention around 11:10, and something felt off. A faint shape lingered in the upper right corner, not behaving like typical reflections or street headlights. Unlike car lights that sometimes flickered through our cul-de-sac windows, this shape remained still. It was too large to be a bug and didn't move like light would. Instead, it hovered near the window, a pale, undefined outline. When I leaned closer and tilted the small screen, the shape became slightly more distinct. Not sharp, but with discernible edges, it resembled a shoulder or the side of a head, barely visible against the glass, like something shrouded in fog. I tried rationalizing it as a bunched-up curtain caught weirdly by night vision. Wanting to ensure the baby wasn't disturbed, I went downstairs and listened. The house was completely silent. Back on the couch, I continued watching the screen. 20 seconds passed. Then the shape shifted. It leaned forward subtly, but incredibly, the curtain remained absolutely motionless. No sound accompanied the movement, no rustling, no breathing. My heart started racing, though I kept telling myself it was just a technical glitch. Then something changed. The shape partially turned, pulling away from the glass. Now distinctly separate from the window, I could see something resembling a face. Not detailed, but with lighter areas in the middle and darker shadows where eyes might be. It was facing the crib, completely still, watching. I don't recall standing up. I suddenly found myself racing up the stairs, taking them two at a time without thinking or grabbing anything. My only focus was getting to her room. The door was closed, exactly as we'd left it. I burst inside and immediately noticed the room felt unnaturally cool. Not freezing, but definitely colder than it should have been. The window remained shut, curtains drawn. The crib was empty. A moment of panic seized me as I scanned every corner of the room, under the crib, behind the rocking chair. Then I saw her. She lay on the carpet beside the dresser, perfectly still, on her back with arms outstretched, staring silently at the ceiling as if gently placed there. When I picked her up, she felt completely normal, warm, breathing steadily, and she even managed a small smile. I carried her to our bedroom and turned on the light. My wife woke up, confused. I explained I'd found the baby on the floor and suggested we might have a loose crib rail, saying nothing more. The monitor was still downstairs, and I didn't retrieve it until morning. Upon checking the feed, I discovered the camera had frozen at 11:13. It was still powered on, stuck on a single frame, showing a faint shape near the window, half turned toward the crib. The curtain remained motionless. Examining the crib revealed nothing broken or loose. She was far too young to have climbed out or fallen. I relocated the camera to a shelf across the room, telling my wife I wanted a better angle. For several nights afterward, the monitor displayed nothing unusual, just the typical grainy black and white image. I started sleeping with the door open, keeping the monitor volume at maximum. Years have passed. Her room looks different now. New curtains, a different monitor, a new crib. That shape hasn't reappeared. Yet sometimes, when checking on her in low light, I still find myself glancing first at the window. Earlier that Saturday, I'd set up trail cameras on the private woodland behind my property. These cameras, which I've owned for a couple of years, typically capture wildlife, squirrels, rabbits, occasional deer, sometimes a raccoon. I set up a camera in a small clearing about a mile in, hoping to catch some wildlife activity. It was a simple spot with grass and low bushes, no big trees around. I left the camera and returned to camp, planning to check the pictures in a few days. When I finally reviewed the images, something strange caught my attention. The first 3 days of photos were completely black. No light, no shadows, nothing. The camera seemed to be working normally, with timestamps showing pictures every 30 seconds. This didn't make sense. Then, on one photo from the second night, everything changed. The clearing was visible, but instead of trees or animals, dozens of tiny white lights hovered just above the ground. These weren't like animal eyes or reflections. They were soft, glowing dots about the size of fireflies. Around 50 or 60 of them were scattered across the frame, some clustered together, others spread out. They looked almost like tiny fallen stars, not bright enough to be anything definitive. The infrared flash revealed the clearing's faint shape, with these lights frozen in place. No movement, no blur. The next images returned to complete darkness. I couldn't explain why only this single photo showed these mysterious lights. Curious and slightly unnerved, I returned to the clearing the next night. Equipped with a flashlight and headlamp, I wanted to investigate. Everything looked completely normal. Grass, bushes, no disturbed ground or unusual footprints. I scanned the area carefully but saw nothing. The woods remained quiet, interrupted only by occasional cricket chirps and owl hoots. Something was definitely odd about that night, but I couldn't explain what. The forest felt different that day. As I was about to leave, something seemed off. The air grew heavy and cold, and the usual forest sounds became muffled and distant. An uneasy feeling crept over me, like unseen eyes were watching. Walking back to my truck, I heard rustling behind me, leaves moving, twigs snapping. I spun around, but saw only trees and shadows. My mind raced, trying to convince myself it was just a deer or some woodland creature. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. Back home, I plugged the camera's memory card into my laptop and started reviewing the property's images. Strange details emerged. Dark shapes that didn't look like any animal I recognized. Shadows that seemed out of place. One photo particularly caught my attention, a blurry figure standing just beyond the tree line. Its outline was too thin, its movements unlike anything human or animal. As I scrolled through the pictures, unease grew. I noticed something odd about the timestamps. There were gaps in the timeline, blocks of time where no pictures were taken, despite the camera's functioning. These missing periods totaled about 20 minutes. Zooming into the clearing photo revealed more mysteries. The lights weren't like fireflies or insects. They were too perfect, too round. Some pulsed faintly, but not in the way you'd expect natural light to behave. I showed the photos to a hunting buddy, hoping for some insight. He just laughed it off, suggesting a camera sensor glitch or distant light reflections. But that didn't make sense. The nearest building was a mile away, and the clearing was surrounded by dense forest. Those moments in the clearing haunted me. The strange atmosphere, the silence, the feeling of being watched. Maybe the woods were playing tricks on my mind. But something told me this was different. I was sitting on the porch with my wife and our 2 kids, just winding down after dinner. The sky was clear, and the stars were out bright. Then my son, who was about 8 at the time, pointed toward the backyard. He said, "Look, Dad, what's that?" I turned to see these lights flickering through the trees just past our back fence. They weren't like fireflies or anything natural. They were too bright and kind of harsh, white and yellow mostly, but sometimes flashing blue. They moved slowly, like they were shifting between the branches, but not really touching the trees. We live way out in the country on the edge of some woods that stretch for miles. It's the kind of place where you don't see many people, and the night is usually just quiet. Crickets, the wind in the trees, maybe a distant train whistle. Nothing much ever happens out here, so what did happen that night felt all the more strange. I decided to check the cameras again, hoping to catch something more clear. When I looked at the new photos, I noticed the blackouts were back. Entire sequences of pictures showing nothing but total darkness, even though it was a clear night with moonlight. Then in one of the pictures, I saw something faint, a blurry, almost transparent shape, standing near the edge of the clearing. It wasn't a person or any animal I knew. It had a vague humanoid shape, but looked kind of distorted, like it was half there or just out of focus. I stared at it for a long time, trying to figure out if it was some trick of the light or a camera glitch. I asked a local game warden about it. He told me cameras sometimes pick up strange things, bugs, moisture, even heat waves, but nothing like what I was describing. That night, I stayed up late thinking about everything I'd seen. I checked the timestamps and photos again and again. The missing time, the black pictures, the floating lights, the blurry shapes. I kept wondering if I had been watched in the woods, if something had been there with me. I still go out hunting and I keep the cameras running, but I haven't seen anything like those lights again. The clearing looks normal, the woods quiet as always. Sometimes when I look at those photos, I get that same feeling I had that night, like something unseen is just beyond the trees, watching, waiting, and I don't know what it is. The night was nearly midnight when the strange lights first appeared. They weren't a steady glow, but more of a pulsing, flickering presence between the trees in our quiet, remote county. My wife initially suggested they might be kids with flashlights, but that theory made no sense. There were no sounds of people, no visitors in this isolated area. For over an hour, these lights hovered and danced among the branches. Every time I tried to get closer to the fence for a better look, they would retreat or vanish behind the trees. They didn't resemble car headlights or a campfire, and the only sounds were the typical nighttime background noise. Something felt off. It was like an unseen presence was watching us, something not quite human. The kids were getting nervous, so I decided to call the police for backup. By the time the officers arrived, the lights had completely disappeared. The backyard was dark, with nothing unusual except our back fence gate standing wide open. We always keep the gate closed because of our dogs, and no one in the family had been outside since dinner. What was even more unsettling was the ground beneath the gate, soft from earlier rain, yet completely undisturbed. No footprints, no tire tracks. It was as if someone or something had passed through without leaving a trace. The police checked the perimeter and questioned us, but our dogs hadn't barked, which was strange. They promised to keep an eye on the area and left. That feeling of something unexplained lingered. Later that night, I checked the backyard one final time. The trees were just trees, and somehow the fence was closed and latched, though I didn't remember doing it. The next morning, everything looked normal. No damage, no footprints, and no sign of the mysterious lights. I still can't explain what we experienced that night. The unexplained gate, the flickering lights, it continues to puzzle me. I apologize, but the text you've provided seems to be an incomplete fragment. Could you please share the full script or passage that you would like me to rewrite? Without the complete context, I cannot effectively restructure the text while maintaining its original meaning.